Transport Committee this morning. I'm Florence Eshalomi, the Chair. Can we have any apologies? Please?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Assembly Members McCartney and Curtin.
Great. Our main, also to welcome Steve O'Connell, who is joining us this meeting on this really important issue of bus and tram safety. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Chair.
Our main discussion today is going to be looking at bus and tram safety, and for anyone joining us online, please do join in and tweet. Our hashtag is Assembly Transport. Could I please ensure and ask everyone to turn off their mobile phones? If you put it on silent or vibrate, it will still buzz, so off please. Are there any other declarations that we need to take note of, please? No. Is everyone happy with the declarations as set out in the order paper?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Membership, terms of reference and standing delegation. Can we note the committee's membership, the terms of reference and standing delegation?
Noted.
And can we look at the minutes from the last meeting on the 25th of April? Are we all happy with the minutes from the last meeting?
Agreed.
Yep, agreed.
And summary list of actions. Can we note the list of actions listed out on pages 57 to 62?
Agreed, noted.
And can we, as a committee, look at the actions under delegated authority in consultation with all the group leads to agree the outputs from the committee's work on Crossrail?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Fantastic. So welcome to our guests this morning. Our first session is going to be looking at tram safety. Just like to introduce and welcome our guests. We have Jill Collins from TfL, Director of Health and Safety and Environment. We have John Fox from TfL, Director of Rail and Sponsored Services. We have Finn Brennan from ASLEF Union. We also have Adrian Jones, Managing Director of First Group, and Jackie Townsend from Trams Operator Limited, Managing Director. So welcome to all of you this morning.
Chair, can I just correct that? I'm not the Managing Director of First Group, I'm the Safety Director in
My
First Group.
apologies, Safety Director of First Group.
Promoting you.
So, you get promoted at this committee.
We're here before you know that.
So our first session will be looking at tram safety. Obviously we had the really sad incident with the Croydon tram derailment in 2017 where unfortunately there were some people who lost their lives. And following that there was the Reid investigation which had a number of recommendations, and TfL also conducted their own investigation looking at a set of recommendations. So we're going to take some questions, just looking at some of those. As chair, I'm going to use my position and start on the questioning of that. And just to ask, on the back of those recommendations, if anyone would like to just give us an update, and if you felt that the recommendations to date and what you felt that, you know, if we're going in the right direction.
But I'd like to start by putting on record that our thoughts do remain with all of those affected by this incident. And just to reiterate to the panel that not a day goes past really without something coming across our desks in order to try and address the incident and the causes and the things we're doing about it. And to restate our determination to make sure that everything that we possibly can is done to address these issues. So just a statement at the start. So we've had a number of reviews of all of the activities that we have undertaken. As you rightly pointed out, there were a number of investigations which threw up a number of recommendations. I think it's fair to say that the primary one is the REIB one, which has 15 recommendations. Just to summarise how we've progressed on those, if you take those 15, 2 of them are addressed at the industry more generally. I can say something about those. But of the 13 that are more specific, we have already completed 7 of those, and of the 6 that remain, all of those have started, and many of them are closing towards completion. And our target is that, where it comes to Croydon anyway, that we will have closed those out by the end of this year or thereabouts. So we have a programme for all of those activities underway. Some of them have been accepted by the regulator as closed out, and a number of them, we update them regularly. Most recently, we can tell you that amongst the recommendations, we have concluded an approach and an implementation on the glazing on trams. One of the recommendations was around how strong the glazing is, what it does, what its purpose is, and we've completed our work on that. We've applied a much thicker film to the glazing on those trams, and that work is now completed. Also, I'm sure you'll be more than aware of the overspeeding device that we have. It's been suggested to us that we have. We're now in contract with a provider of that. We're in the design phase, working out how that will work, and there's a programme of activity which sees that completed and on-tram completion by the end of this calendar year. And those are the highlights of the latest activities that we've done. I think it's well documented, the work over the 2.5 years now that we've done on signage, on line side works, on the in-cab device, the driver's protection device, and a number of other things that we've undertaken. So I'm happy to take any questions on those, but I'd like to summarise and say that we're appreciative of everyone's support to get this far, but we are quite well advanced on all of those recommendations, and I think, as Sam French said in his annual report this past year, it recognises the determination that we've got to complete them all, and has commended us in our joint efforts.
So there's good progress on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'd certainly be a lot less complacent than John about how much progress has been made. For me, the key recommendations, to representative of the drivers, the people literally at the front end, are the recommendations 11 and 12 made by the RAIB, which talk about issues around fatigue, but also, crucially, a just culture. In any safety critical environment, the culture is the most important thing. And that's not just a matter of having the correct policies and the correct forms that are ticked in the right place. It's people being confident and able to say, whenever an incident happens or a problem happens, this is something we can learn from. If, for example, a driver makes a mistake, does something that is potentially dangerous, you need a culture where that driver can go to their manager and say, Governor, I made a mistake today, and something bad could have happened because of that. And if you look at the Sandylands incident, there was a precursor incident 2 weeks beforehand. The culture did not exist where the driver involved was able to go to a manager and say something bad could have happened there. Because the culture that existed is that drivers felt if they made a mistake, they were going to be blamed, they were going to be disciplined. We'd had a case not long before, but a year and a half before, where a driver who had oversped and had an accident not just had been disciplined and sacked by the company, but had been prosecuted. And that fostered a culture where if people made a mistake, they wanted to hide that mistake. If a culture like that exists in a safety critical organisation, then accidents are bound to follow. The key thing to guarantee safety for the future on Tramlink has to be that change in culture. Now, I do appreciate there have been some changes in senior management at Tramlink, but that has yet to filter down to the front line. The drivers booking on in the morning are still seeing the same managers who still treat them in the same way. Equally with the recommendations on fatigue. Now, some progress has been made on fatigue, and we're discussing new rosters with the company at the moment and making some good progress on that. But I would argue that all the company has done is the very, very minimum asked for in the recommendations. I'll give you a very practical example, and again the in-cab guardian device comes into this. All that device really has spent a lot of money telling us something we already know. Because guess what? If someone has to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go to work, travel into work, spend 4.5 hours driving, have something to eat, inside half an hour or so, they're going to start to feel sleepy as they digest the food. And I'm sure any of you have had the same experience driving a car up a motorway, etc. If you're driving your car, the advice would be, well, pull into a service station, have a nap, etc. Of course, you can't do that if you're in charge of a vehicle with people behind you. But I don't believe the culture exists where someone can come into work and say, well, actually, last night my child had a toothache, the neighbours were having a row, I didn't get a proper night's sleep, I really don't feel well enough to do my duty this morning because I'm tired, and be treated with sympathy and support. Actually, the most likely reaction is going to be, well, are you going sick then? So unless we have a culture where people can be completely open and honest and feel supported, then we're not going to crack the issue of safety.
So just on that fatigue one, because the ARR referenced a really good practice guidance. So are you saying that TOL aren't actually adopting that and taking some of that on board?
I don't think TOL have done anything like enough yet to change the culture. And I accept that culture change takes time and new management has been brought in at senior level. But I think a hell of a lot more has to happen to change that culture. And I do, TOL are clearly aware there are a lot of eyes on them and are taking steps that are being pushed to take. And we are making some progress, but I think there's a long, long way to go to building that just culture with proper guarantees on safety.
Thank you. Adrian,
Can I answer that? Alongside with Jackie as well. Can I just firstly, before I start, just reinforce what John said earlier on, in that everybody at First Group was deeply shocked and saddened by the tragic incident. And we want to reiterate our condolences to all the victims, their families and friends, and anyone injured or affected by the incident. We're committed to work with TfL and work tirelessly to adopt the recommendations from the RAIB investigation. I think we certainly in the areas specifically for TOL, we have made extremely good progress. I don't disagree with Finn that a just culture is extremely important. We know that. I mean, across First Group, safety is a personal core value for us all, and we do adopt a real culture of safety. If I could invite Jackie to speak a bit more specifically about what has been done to promote the particularly reporting of incidents and people feeling able to report incidents, I think that may be helpful.
Okay. I think as you're, I mean, Finn and I work very closely with each other as we do with Unite. Where we are, I think anybody that has done any investigation into just culture, it takes about 3 years to actually embed that into any company. And so we are at the start of all that. What we have agreed with the trade unions is an error and violation policy, because Finn's right is that we had 4 surveys done on our drivers, one by British Transport Police, the ORR, the RAIB, and also our own staff satisfaction survey, where our drivers were very critical of the environment of which they worked. And and you have to accept all of those things from the survey. So what we have done is that we've done an error and violation policy. So anybody that is involved in any error, and that's any operational incident, anything to do with that, is that it's done on a development process. So we develop people, we give them competency training, and that's how it's dealt with. There is no discipline at all in toll on anybody that makes an error. Unfortunately, if they are involved in a violation where they have purposely done something, then that is a violation of which they will be disciplined. And so that's much easier for the drivers, because they now understand what the difference is, most of them. And it also helps my managers, who understand the difference, because that was the problem. The perception was that if a manager liked you, you got off, and if he didn't like you, you didn't. Now, whether that was true or not true, perception becomes reality. So we've invested that. We did have a bit about fatigue, if people fatigue, but we have had a few drivers that have rung in and said, I've had a really bad night, and we have accepted that they are not coming in, and they are still paid. It's not as though we don't pay them, but very few do that. You know, my managers actually said, but if you allow them to ring in and say that they're tired, they'll all ring in, all right? Well, I have to tell you that people don't do that. So we have all of that. We are on a journey, but I think we've started well. Our communication is much better with the staff now. We have a monthly communication with them, which is called The Loop, which tells them all about the safety and what we've targets against what incidents we've had for that period. It tells them about our performance. It tells them about any incidents and what's happening within Tram. And also we have a magazine which comes out every 3 months, we have safety alerts, all of those things, operating systems, which we share with all of our staff, not just with the drivers, but with everybody else that works at Tram. And that's becoming more effective. We have CIRAS, where they can report any incident, and also the first group safety report, which is all anonymous. And any driver that has any incidents, especially we're talking about fatigue, is that we have introduced a machine onto this tram that alerts any driver for microsleeps, drowsiness, distraction, and overspeed of over 70 kilometres an hour. And from that information, we're able to draw some really important information about time of day, driver, duties, location, of where these fatigue incidents actually happen, which is why when we're introducing these new rosters, is that I believe it's the first time in this country that rosters have been based on the information from our own drivers about fatigue, and we've incorporated all of those things, the ORR best practice, the location of where these time of day. One of the things about the rosters is that they need a break within 3 hours of booking on, because if you book, as Finn says, if you come in at 3 o'clock in the morning, you probably haven't had breakfast. You probably haven't had a drink. So what do you think is going to happen? So we're incorporating all of those things. I'm quite excited about the work that we're doing at Toll, because it's innovative. We are sharing that across industries, bus, trucks, national rail, of the information we're doing. But you need the data to be able to work with this. And so we've been doing this for about a year to actually get the correct data to be able to manage these things. So we're beginning to get more and more data that enables us to know, and if any driver has any issue, we work with them on a plan individually. We work with our occupational health. We've actually identified a couple of drivers that have medical conditions. We've had 2 with sleep apnea, which they didn't know they had. Another driver who has an underactive thyroid, but she hadn't been for a blood test. And so basically this identified that she had a problem. She's now gone back and up to a dose of thyroxine. So it is not a punitive thing. We never discipline anybody for any of this. This is about helping them to live their lives. And one of the things that we are planning to do in the next few weeks is to actually have an open day with all of the families of our tram people, to actually show them about what the work we're doing with fatigue, and also to explain to them about their circadian rhythm, because people are either owls or they're early birds, and in your body just has to go with all of that. It's an area with fatigue that the transport industry has not done vigilantly before. It's very new. There's not a lot out there, and we're really sort of making inroads into what it means. And of course the other issue is that people, they can't differentiate between tiredness and fatigue. Fatigue is a chronic issue. Like, you know, it is not being tired. And if you're on shift work, you are prone to chronic fatigue. And those are the issues that we're looking at. So I'm very happy for the Assembly to come to Toll to actually see what we're doing and the work that we're doing, if you wish to.
That's great, and we'll definitely take you up on that offer. And I think just, I'll bring in my colleague, Assembly Member Bailey. One of the things I wanted to add was, obviously it's really tragic what happened with the derailment and the deaths, but just coming back to some of the points that Finn mentioned, really, this culture, which in essence it's something that would have been happening over the years, and had management been responding to that and taking note of some of those concerns coming forward, it's really great that there's an action and programme in place agreed with the staff to address that going forward. But just looking back, were there things that maybe could have been signalling points and flash points that you could have picked up maybe earlier?
Yeah, well, I wasn't the managing director of Toll at that point, so I I can't really say that. I was brought in after the incident.
Okay, that's fine.
All I'm saying about it is that all I've done is built on to what was already there. Yes, there were things, and then if we look at anything that weren't
Adrian
right,
might be able to come in on that point.
I became safety director in 2015, so it was fairly early. There weren't any indicators that would certainly come up at group level that would highlight a cultural issue at TOL.
But I think, if I might say, in terms of the wider transport industry and how the just culture, so-called this culture of interaction, listening, working out the best outcome, it is an immature place for the whole of the industry. And I think what we've learned here is how to do that a bit better. Now, Finn might say you should have done it, and you might say we should have done it, but I don't think anybody is really world class at this at the moment. So we're in this learning together, and I think that's a good place to be, and we just need to share that a bit more, because whether it's national rail, international rail, or international transport, I don't think that there's a lot of best practice in this area.
Sorry. Well, I was going to say, the airline and nuclear industry clearly are leaders in this. In the rail and transport industry and in Tramlink and a slightly different page where Jill and I are working on the Underground, there's actually massive resistance to many layers of managers to it. Because many managers at lower level, have come through and brought up the culture where they see their role as disciplining the people below them rather than leading them. And there's a huge work to be done. But the impetus for that cultural change has to come from the top. And I do find almost in a symbolic position here in between TfL and First Group, because of course one of the other issues involved in the safety management down there is the interaction between the two parts. There was a classic example sometime last year when new signage appeared on the system put up by Transport for London, which was quite a surprise to the people working on the Tramlink system at the time, because they simply wasn't out and communicating properly with each other. I hope that's improved, but I think there's a long way to go.
Thank you. Member Bailey.
Morning. I just want to focus in on this area of culture, because of course you seem to have had the system change, but if I follow Finn's comment, I'm sorry, in fact I think it's Jackie's comment actually, excuse me, that it takes 3 years for these things to come through. Of course that means we're supposedly going to be in 3 years of poor culture. Is there anything you have to speed up that culture? And if I go to Finn's point, it seems like you're very actively changing the culture for the drivers, which is correct. What are you doing for the management? How are you affecting their training, affecting the collective responsibility around safety? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, it would seem that traditionally the safety response has been for the driver. Is it now seen as for everybody else? Is that something you're working on?
Well, one of the things that came out of a couple of surveys was the relationship between the driver and the controller. And that was not a great relationship. So what we have done is the drivers no longer report to the controllers, they report to the duty managers who are above the controllers. And what we're doing is we're developing each of our managers. I mean, Toll is very small. There's only 236 people, so I don't think I've got hundreds of managers. And so every one of them is on a development course about leadership, about managing, about coaching, about mentoring, how to talk to each other. And I have to say, I occasionally experience some very strange conversations between the controller and the driver, both really talking at each other and not to each other. It's quite good that they're taped calls so that you can actually go, who do you think this is? But we are developing how to investigate operational incidents, because what questions to ask. We've now got more assessors that will develop these drivers. So every development program is bespoke to that driver, and the managers are part of that development plan. And each driver, each duty manager has a group of their own drivers, so that they are responsible for that group of people, for their welfare, and also for developing them going forward. Everybody has a personal development plan. So what we're doing is we're not just putting everything on the drivers, we're actually saying to our managers, actually you need to stop managing. You need to, this isn't about disciplining people. I have to say we discipline very, very few people in any year. But if they have been involved in a violation, then absolutely that needs to happen. But our managers also need to understand why things happen to people, and not, as you know, as Finn said, was the culture before is, well, actually, I'm not going to believe you. But we're teaching them how to do that. We've also got Be Safe in first group as well, and that's about having conversations with people, and that really works well, so that everybody has safety is in the heart of everything that we do within first group. And so yeah, it's not just everybody within Toll is change. The whole thing with Just Culture is you have to change everybody, and so we are changing everybody within Toll.
Adrian, quickly.
Yeah, can I just mention, Jackie there mentioned our Be Safe programme. Aside from the bespoke training that's been done with the local managers and supervisors, we've actually had a programme that's rolled out across the last 3 years across the whole of first group, all 5 divisions, and we call it Be Safe. And this is all about changing safety behaviours through positive reinforcement. We took some science from some colleagues in the US, and we've trained every manager and supervisor across first group in how to have what we call touch point conversations, which are really about positive reinforcement of good safety behaviours. So it's a positive interaction and not one of the historical negative type interactions. So we don't go out to find people doing things wrong, we actually go out to find people doing things right. And we try to have like a 4-to-1 ratio of positive to challenging conversations. And over time that is going to change completely our safety culture right across the group. And tram operations are an integral part of that.
Thank you. Assembly Member Keith and Assembly Member Connell, quickly. Just mindful we need to move on.
Please.
Right, a few things, unfortunately. First one's to Jill, if I may. Are you aware of any dissatisfaction from any current or former TfL board member on how TfL dealt with the investigations into the derailment?
Sorry, can you just repeat that again, please? Any?
Yeah. Are you aware of any dissatisfaction from any current or former member of the TfL board on how TfL dealt with the investigations into the derailment?
How TfL dealt with the investigations?
Yes.
No, I don't think how we dealt with the investigations. We had our own investigation, independent investigation undertaken by S&C Leveland, which we shared with the safety panel, which is a subcommittee of the TfL board. And we fully supported both RAIB and ORR's investigations.
Okay. Are you aware of the email that, the letter that Michael Liebrich wrote to Howard Carter on the 13th of July 2017 expressing concerns that Leon Daniels was the person who reported on the Sandylands, given his background as a director of tram operations for over 10 years?
I believe there was correspondence between Michael and Michael Liebrich, the chair, and Howard Carter, but the individual content of that and responses back and forwards, I think.
It may be helpful just to clarify that we received a number of correspondence from Michael prior to this meeting, which he did indicate to Mike Brown that he was going to share with us. We're happy to share that with you later, so maybe you could take that back.
So I'm aware that Michael wrote about the fatigue report. So aware that was correspondence between TfL and Michael as chair of the panel, and as a former board member about the fatigue audit we undertook.
What, sorry?
The fatigue audit that was undertaken.
Yeah. Okay, so if I could just take this one. In fact, before I do that, do you know who is on the Sandyland Incident Review Board?
The Sandylands Incident Review Board, yes, it's a review board that's chaired by our General Counsel that's set up to look at our claims, and look how we manage claims and progress them through and other sort of legal issues.
Would you be able to share with us the actual members of the board? Not right now, obviously.
If you could provide that to us, that would be helpful, please. Thank you.
So just couple more questions, if you don't mind, Chair. So, on June the 26th, 2017, the Safety, Sustainability and HR panel were told by Leon Daniels that the fatigue audit was satisfactory and did not give rise to any concerns. Given that TfL later classified the audit as requires improvement, and the RAIB statement that the conclusions of the TfL audit are consistent with its own findings, that at the time of the incident, TOL's management of fatigue risk was not in line with published industry practice, and that there was significant scope for improvement. How does that square with Leon's comments that the audit was satisfactory and did not give any raised concerns?
I think when Leon was commenting on, it was a progress update, the audit investigation work had just been undertaken, and the audit itself hadn't been concluded, so it was more of a progress statement of where we were at the time in the audit, and then it was later concluded after we looked at the field work and results of what that entailed.
So you're saying that it's a matter of timescales, that when Leon reported you hadn't had the full report, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we hadn't had the full report when Leon had reported.
Can you tell me when you did get the full report?
The full report was issued 15th of September, I think it was. The field work was done in June that year, and so it was the field work had been finished very close to when the panel
so he was
meeting
reporting on the field work, yeah?
Well, I think it was just a general update on where we were at the time, and the final audit report hadn't been developed and concluded at that stage. There was more work to be done.
But is it not a little strange, though, that the report changes significantly between the field work and the conclusions? Wouldn't you have thought that the field work might have highlighted some of these concerns in order to give you the conclusions you got to?
Well, yeah, I can't comment on sort of the specifics of what Leon was thinking at the time, but the field work would have flagged up issues, and then we would look at them against the criteria of the audit and the ORR's findings to come to firmer conclusions, as well as looking at how First Group were complying with their own procedures as well. So it's an ongoing process and getting more evidence as
but
the
your
report
report
went on.
was separate from the RAIB report, wasn't it?
The audit report?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, just finally, yeah, this is to everybody on the panel really, but it only requires a very short answer, which is, do you believe that TfL's approach to the Sandylands investigation has been transparent and satisfactory throughout this process? And are there any significant questions to answer? Jackie, do you want to kick off with that one?
I think the whole thing about Sandylands, I don't want to specifically go into the fatigue audit, but the whole thing about tram and the whole tram industry, not just Croydon, which is why some of those recommendations have gone to the wider UK tram industry, was tram was based on line of sight for drivers, and so the driver was always going to make the right decision because they were driving line of sight. Since Sandylands, the UK tram industry has reviewed its position, as well as the rail regulator, who also had a recommendation out of the Reid report, is that as an industry we are re-looking at the whole of how tram works, and in fact we've also been working with Europe as well about the tram industry. And the tram itself has always been a very basic vehicle. And that's why TfL, working with ourselves, are adding extra things onto the tram that aids the driver, like the emergency brake. We're introducing iTram, the glass, all of those things, which were never introduced within the tram, and other tram companies within the UK are doing these things. The fact that we also reduce the speed from 80 to 70 kilometres an hour is not just Croydon, it's within the whole of the UK industry. I think in any of these tragic events, it's a real shame that we have to learn from them. And unfortunately, in any of these industries that we have, is we all learn a very hard lesson from these things. And Tram is learning from this. And as the MD of Tram Operations Limited, everything in my power will be there that we never ever have another Sandylands.
That's good to hear.
And so that's why we're doing all the things that we're doing. So, but you know, I mean, I can't say that we did everything right beforehand, but we have learnt and we are rectifying those, and we're working with the TFL.
Just to remind you, actually, the question, although I appreciate the answer, the question was, do we feel that TFL's approach to the Sandylands investigation has been transparent and satisfactory throughout?
Perhaps if I can...
Well, we'll just go through it.
Well, TFL, we had lots of external people doing investigations, the RAIB, the ORR, the British Transport Police. TFL, with ourselves, have been cooperating with those people, and TFL did their own investigation because they own the contract on the tram, and I believe that TFL could not have been doing anything differently to what they have done in the circumstances.
That's fine, thank you.
Adrian?
I can only echo what Jackie said. I mean, since the incident, there have been thorough investigations. We have worked very, very closely with TFL and committed to implementing all the recommendations from the RAIB report. So in terms of relationships between us and TFL, they've certainly been satisfactory from our point of view.
My view is, I think some of the public commentary on the investigations rather got lost in the weeds of the details of which report and the fatigue audit, etc., and lose sight of the bigger picture. Yeah. 7 people died that day. The driver of that tram has been prosecuted, but still to this date not charged. You know, massive tragedy for all of the people involved. And while I can understand people wanting to peer into when a fatigue audit happened, etc., I'm not sure it takes us much further on. You know, we do have to look at the bigger picture, and I hope we get a chance to talk more about some of the things that have been done and still need to be done.
We're going to move on to...
I was only going to add, it feels like there is a lot of scrutiny for us from the inside, and if we try to do anything other than being transparent, that information will come out eventually. So we were talking about culture earlier. In our mindset, we present what we can, do the best that we can, present the information that is available to us in the best way that we can. There is no culture that I can see of not trying to be transparent. That's just a personal observation from how it's felt through the last 2.5 years of this process.
I reiterate everything that's been said, and also say as well that we've also been transparent where we've got it wrong as well, and explained why, and tried to rectify it as soon as we could. So I think we have been transparent throughout.
Okay, thank you. Assemblymember O'Connell.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just briefly, and again, I'd like to register my thanks to the committee and also yourselves for today's meeting, your ongoing work here over an incident that was so tragic to Croydon and affected some people, particularly the New Addington community. This is a point that is going to be asked a bit further later, but it's this big picture point I wanted to touch upon about fatigue, because I understand completely there's recommendations around fatigue, a fatigue report, fatigue audit. Is understood that drivers and people generally are hours or early birds and getting up at 2:30 in New Addington to go to work and to get on a tram, to have breakfast first now and that sort of stuff. But there's perhaps, and I'd be interested at some stage during this morning, perhaps now, to touch upon something more radical about fatigue and about expectation of people being expected to drive at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. We can make recommendations and we can address it and we can support and put culture and that whole thing. And I believe there's a willingness across all parties, but it might be a more fundamental thing that might involve cost that will actually change the way of working in this industry and other industries, whereby people aren't expected to work those sort of hours. That might mean re-rostering, that might mean more staff. It's that big picture thing that I think it may well be that we might be interested in the recommendations, because there are 15 recommendations, there are 8 TFL recommendations, there are other reports. This is good stuff, but there might be something more fundamental that I think we could do to avoid another tragedy. And it's just a bigger picture thing that I think Finn touched upon, particularly on the tiredness aspect. Could anybody point any other ideas that we could have that's even bigger than the things that we touched upon? And I think Finn's bursting to...
And I'm very, very glad you asked that question, Steve, because it is crucial. So I get the example earlier on someone waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning to come into work. Now, for instance, where I work with TfL and London Underground, the earliest time a driver starts is 4:45 in the morning. I still think that's too early. But we have drivers who work shifts through the night to take out the earliest trains in the morning, but the latest ones to bed. Now, that has a resource implication. It does mean you need to have more staff because you're doing less productive work during the night, but you're avoiding having people starting at, to be frankly, silly o'clock in the morning. Because the key thing is, and I think you pointed to it, Steve, these are human beings, not robots. If you throw all, and people do have a personal responsibility, I absolutely accept that. If you throw all the responsibility back on individuals and say, well, you've got to get up at 3 o'clock, so you've got to go to bed at 7 o'clock the night before. Well, I can't get my 7-year-old to go to bed at 8 o'clock on a summer's night. Yeah? The idea that an adult is going to do that on a regular basis, yeah, is just not feasible with the best will in the world. Yeah? Any human being has other responsibilities. Yeah? They have to put their own kids to bed. Yeah? Not go to bed themselves at 7 o'clock every evening. So it's right to say people have a personal responsibility to report when they're tired, etc. But you have to have a system in place that recognises human beings are doing this work. Equally, if someone is working late shifts, well, is the expectation that they're going to come home and sleep through all the rest of the next day? Well, what happens when the road is getting dug up outside, or the kids wake up, or the Sainsbury delivery has to be done, or the dog has to be taken to the vet? All those responsibilities that people have, we have to recognise as human beings, not robots. Now, that does have a resource implication, and we all want an efficient system. But unless you have enough staff in place, and then this, of course, comes back to TfL, First Group. Yeah? First Group run on a very tight budget. They're paid by TfL. If they have to have more drivers, they're going to say, we want TfL to pay. TfL is going to point out that George Osborne took all of the money away from TfL. But it is a real problem that has to be dealt with.
Just could you possibly have a brief response from either Adrian and John on that bigger picture piece around resource, drivers, numbers, rosters, etc.?
I take Finn's point about night turn staff, but inevitably you drive a lot of a different challenge if you have all night-time staff. So, you know, it's not necessarily popular to tomorrow to go back to Finn and say, right, fine, we're not doing early turn anymore, everyone's working nights, so you're happy with that? I think there'll be equally challenges around forcing people to work nights. And then you get into the question of, well, how early is too early? So if 3:20 is too early, what about 4 o'clock? Or what about 5 o'clock then? Well, let's say 5:30. Okay, well, by the time you get to work at 6:30, the first train out is 7 o'clock, and therefore we're not running any services until 7 o'clock in the morning. There may well be a comment or two from those who use it.
Well, there's bigger resources. My point, and I'm going to have to move it on through you, Chair, is almost it's so difficult for people who run businesses and unions to push aside that piece. It's to say what will be an ideal, which is what the point I was pursuing. I'll leave it there, Chair, because I know we're going to pursue
I'm
this.
just mindful of time. We've got 2 more sections to cover on this, so I'm just going to bring in Assembly Member Pigeons.
Tiny things. Just to go back to Jill and talk about this correspondence between Michael Liebrick and Mike Brown. On the 10th of August, Michael Liebrick wrote to Mike Brown expressing his view that there should be a safety officer reporting directly to you. Do you agree with him? To Mike, sorry. Directly to Mike.
He wrote, yeah, Michael did write to Mike Brown.
No.
Let
me be clear, sorry, that you should be reporting directly to Mike.
I should be reporting directly to Mike.
Do you agree with him?
I do have a dotted line right to Mike, so I do report into Mike.
Directly?
Not directly, indirectly.
But that's the operative word here, directly to Mike. Do you think that you should be doing that?
That's one option that could be that's being considered. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Or the position of a safety director reporting into Mike for the group. Yes.
Okay.
Right. Thank you. We're just going to move on, just mindful of time, members. Our next session, we're just going to delve in a little bit more. We've covered some of it, just in terms of the responses to the recommendations. I'll bring in my colleague, Assembly Member Pigeon.
Lovely. I just before I get into that, I just want to pick up maybe with Jackie and John. Has your approach to managing the tram services trams have changed since Sandilands? And is it now that you're managing it more like a railway service rather than a bus service? Has that sort of fundamentally changed? John, do you want to go first?
I think when you have those recommendations in front of you, it makes you think differently about how we're going to manage this tramway. Unfortunately, it has taken that incident to challenge the whole tram industry,
Yes.
not just the one in Croydon, that there are challenges and opportunities for putting different arrangements in on trams. And yes, we have been challenged to do so. And so yes, there is an element of railway thinking, you might say, around... I mean, I think, you know, RSSB was set up after the Ladbroke Grove disaster, and the heavy rail industry learnt from that major incident and put in lots of different arrangements. In a way, that's similar to what has happened here. And of course, the Light Rail Safety and Standards Board is also now set up to learn lessons, not just for local in Croydon, but also across the national rail industry. And I'm part of that set up now to try and promulgate some of the lessons we've learned. So I think there is some lessons to be learned from National Rail, and we've started that. And I think there's also lessons to be learned sharing across the 7 tramways and 2 light railways in the UK, where perhaps that wasn't quite as readily done before.
So your thinking has kind of changed as a result of this to how you manage the risks on the trams?
Yeah, I think we're definitely on a journey, and we're changing the way we approach things. You just look at the actions that we are taking to do so, yeah.
And Jackie, from your point of view?
Yeah, from my point of view, I think a tram is not a bus and it's not a train, so but it is covered by ROGs, and I think that the emphasis has really been about maybe raising our game a little, that all of our standards within tram that we've introduced are all based on railway. But we have to remember, because we travel in the town, that we still are covered under the Highways Act. So it's quite complex, and sometimes there are things that the highways need, e.g. road signs. Road signs are very small in comparison to railway signs, and which was one of the reasons that we worked with TfL about putting the yellow, if you come to Croydon, around the signs, because we can't have railway signs under the Highways Act, and we have to have authority to do that. So things that you can sort of just take for granted within rail, we can't do that in tram. So absolutely, some of my senior managers, we've all come from rail, and so we have put all our standards as though that we are a rail company for that, incorporating the highways as well. So ROGS is very clear in our minds now about everything that we're responsible for. You know, when we have any incident, it comes under the RAIB. It's not a road traffic accident, and so that's the way that we behave, and that's how we drive it. But there is a bit of a conflict between the Highways Act and also ROGS. So.
I suppose it's complex, but the thinking is different, running buses to running rail, and actually, I agree, this falls in between, but it's how you think about it.
Our standards are right.
Yeah.
I think also from a policy perspective, though, trams will get more expensive to build in future as a result of this and those things that happen. So there is, from a transport policy point of view, an expense to set up any transport network, and this will drive costs in that area without doubt.
What I'd like to ask now is about, we've talked about some of the changes and the recommendations from all these reviews. How have you been engaging drivers and other stakeholders, including passengers actually, in how you're going about implementing these recommendations? Jackie, yes, let's start with you.
Okay, so within all of our communications with all of the staff, that's the revenue protection inspectors and all that as well, and the controllers, is that we are having driver briefings with our drivers. There's 2 of those a week. That's mainly based on safety, but it gives them the briefings of what we're doing. We also send out this sort of monthly loop letter, and also every driver actually books on at the depot and sees somebody when they come in. So there's always some communication between the driver and the controller. Now, it may not always be like nice conversations between them because if you book in at 3 o'clock in the morning, everybody's a bit grumpy, but they do talk to them. So there is much more correspondence. Also, we have an open door policy. One of the things that I've introduced since we've been there is a tea and chat with Jackie on a Friday afternoon. So if you want to come for that, so actually quite a few drivers take that up. We have a cup of tea and we have a biscuit. If we're lucky, it's a bit of cake. And they tell me everything they don't like and what they do like. And I have to say that is really quite rewarding. I mean, one of the things that we've actually worked with TfL about is that orientation in the tunnel. I think that you know that the driver appeared not to know which way he was going. And so actually out of the drivers came the cat's eyes that we have put in the tunnel. It actually came from the drivers. And we have put cat's eyes into those tunnels so that they can see which, they're orientated about which way. They have been instrument in the lighting into tunnels. So lots of things that they are wanting to tell us about, they comment on how we can make things better. So all of that happens. Stakeholder-wise, we've been to quite a few scrutiny meetings at Croydon Council, and given them an update and continue to do that. We've had the leader of the council come to Croydon, Tony Newman, came with TfL and met with ourselves. And in fact, we've got Sarah Jones on Friday coming. So we also are doing work with the community in New Addington. We have to also remember is that 40% of my drivers live in New Addington. So this isn't, so this was very personal to Tram. And we're doing some community work with them as well. We're helping to feed the children in the school holidays and all of those sorts of things. We're doing lots of work in schools. We bring quite lots of groups into the Tram to show them. So we've opened up to the community and lots of groups come in and just see us and we talk about the Tram. And we've also had some of the survivors come to the Tram because they want to see what we do, and so we're doing all of those things. So anybody, the Met Police, we do lots of work with them about how we can work with them, because that also includes the knife crime that we have in Croydon, and we help towards of that. So we are opening up and we're working with TfL and ourselves just so that everybody, we are a community transport system, which is very different to train and lots of big bus companies. And so the people of Croydon own that Tram. And I go in and talk to them actually on the Tram themselves. And people say to me, we love the Tram, Jackie. People don't love buses, people don't love trains, but people love that Tram. And you can see by that because we don't have much graffiti, we don't have much rubbish. People, you go on that Tram and people look after it. And that's because we have to work together to make that happen.
Okay, and let me just tease out a little bit more there, hearing everything you're saying, but you're making big changes, you're implementing these recommendations. Yes. How are you consulting drivers, but also passengers, real passengers? I'm going to come to you in a minute, Finn. How are you getting passengers involved in this? Because they may have suggestions as well.
Can I have a go at that?
Yeah, the customer service.
So one of the challenges that we had after the incident was about using passenger information complaints. Yes. People had written in various forms of communication. And so one of the things that challenged us was, were we really valuing that information as it came? So we decided to change the way that we listen to customers' complaints. We now have a joined-up system that was in place very shortly after the incident, where we have a process for dealing with information, particularly safety-critical information that is coming in, and we deal with that on an immediate basis. We go and check the data, we go and check the information that people write into us. So we are listening. There is a report that goes around to all of us on a daily basis of all the things, not just safety things that happen. We look at that. And one example, last week, a customer wrote in saying that she thought that a tram was overspeeding out to New Addington. We checked that immediately. We couldn't find any evidence of it. But I wrote to her personally to invite her to come in and tell us about her experience, and was it actually, you know, it might have actually have been a valid speed, and we think it was, but come in and tell us a little bit more because you might not have got the location right and so on. So I think it's driven us, it's led us to be more sensitive to what our customers are saying about what they want from the system, and also when they use, there are eyes and ears about out there when it isn't picked up in other ways, what's going on. I think that's changed.
But that's the people who are rightly contacting you with concerns, but generally, is there any work, is there any user group, is there anything with tram passengers that you're doing to engage them with the service?
Well, I mean, apart from the dialogue with the local communities and through Travel Watch, there isn't specifically a passenger
okay,
group.
That's
I mean,
fine.
yeah.
That's fine. I'm just trying to clarify.
Yeah.
Just trying to clarify that. Let me come to Finn. Let's just pick up how are drivers being engaged. We've heard lots of stuff about the communications, which sounds good, but it's about it being two-way and how they're being consulted on these changes.
Well, Jackie and I have the pleasure this afternoon of another visit to ACAS. After 2 days of strike action down there,
yes.
from a 90% yes vote, which tells you a little about how staff engaged they feel, how valued they feel. There's a huge amount to be done. I do think there are big weaknesses in the consultation and the engagement of people at the moment. The drivers see changes as coming from above and being done to them. They don't feel that they are being involved in these discussions. The representatives don't feel, and I know Jackie does want to change this, but there's a hell of a long way to go. They don't feel that they're being engaged in those discussions about what things are going to happen. And to some extent, there is a process of edicts come down from TfL saying, first group, you have to do this. First group management then say to their staff, you have to do this. No one is really consulting to the people right at the front and saying, what impact will this have on you? So a long way to go on that, Vice Chair.
And what about the issue, the specific issue in terms of the new technology, the Guardian devices? How are drivers feeling about them now?
I think there's certainly a lot less suspicion than there was initially, but it was a classic example because something was just imposed from above rather than people being engaged. First thing people heard about it was when it started to appear. You know, classic wrong way to do things. If you want to bring change in, you have to bring your people with you. And that means detailed consultation with the elected health and safety reps, making sure they're involved in part of the process. So they then become your ambassadors in the mess room and the front line, reassuring people. Because we had to go through a very painful process, and still are to some extent with the Guardian device, that could have been avoided if consultation had been proper in the first place. But again, to a large extent, it was driven by a knee-jerk reaction. Something has to be done. TfL tells First Group, do something. And people didn't think through the process.
And thereby we strike the balance between would we have anything in a cab today when you challenge us about that or not, and getting it right. It's a real balance to strike.
Most you are leading the way for trams across the country in terms of trying to get this balance right. Is there, Finn, other support that you think tram drivers need other than what's already being put in place? And I realise we're at the early part of the process. It sounds, obviously you have your two positions, but it sounds like you work fairly well together, both being your sides. Hopefully things will improve. Is there something else that you think tram drivers need in terms of support that we should be aware of?
I think it is getting to grips with changing the culture down there and understanding people are human beings. I do think we have to, and it's our responsibility as a trade union to keep hammering management with this. Some of the stuff is quite small, dealing with the issues around fatigue. Visiting the mess rooms down there. Actually, if you're tired on your half-an-hour break, you should be able to sit down in peace and quiet and have a 10-minute nap. Really good idea. There's no facility for people to do that in tramline. There's hard seating in the mess room, etc. Small stuff like that. And our health and safety, we have a new health and safety rep locally who's now engaging with these issues and making those changes. But in terms of support from outside, all I would ask is that when we do have unfortunate events like having to be on strike, which we want to avoid, there is an understanding that this just doesn't come from our members being greedy or lazy. It's because they've got real issues and concerns, and we want to work with the company to resolve that. My biggest thing I would ask for, though, is a closer dialogue between TfL and First Group, but also involve us in that dialogue, because the situation at the moment is TfL do not speak to me about trams because they think that's the business of first group. Yeah? We're very happy to speak to anyone to make things better, and we'd like to have those tripartite discussions involving TfL. So if you could knock their heads together to make that happen, that'd be really helpful.
We try. I just have one more question, because a lot of my questions were on fatigue, which we've already covered, but I just wanted to pick up with you, John, the issue around the windows and doors, the sort of containment, passenger containment issue. It says that you're putting extra film, for want of a better word, over the windows to help with that. Did I hear you right when you said that's now complete? Because I think your target was March.
Yes, yeah, so it's complete.
Now complete. But also I think the investigation said that there should be further research to look at improving passenger containment.
Yeah.
What's happening with that? That's ongoing.
So one of the things that we had to think through was one of the other recommendations, aside from the containment one, was around having an efficient evacuation process. So one of the ways to improve containment is to improve the calibre of the glazing to go to lamination or whatever. But the challenge there was that if you put in impregnable glass on the side of a tram and then you want to equally evacuate, how does that work? Are you creating a bigger risk by following one recommendation and not the other? So we really had to think through that quite carefully to make sure we weren't creating another problem by solving one. What we came up with was this film solution, and also shows some of the complexity, I think, is because when we did some of the testing around would the body shell be able to take heavy laminate glass, what the technical response was no, it would not. And we would start to get cracking and disintegration of the body shell on the tram if we put heavy laminate in. So by solving, again, one problem, we just create another where we'd be withdrawing trams from service and having even more overcrowding on certain days and certain times. So it took us a while to come to the right conclusion for the whole network in that regard. But in terms of what we can do for the future, we will need to replace the Bombardier trams, the 2/3 of the fleet of those. That was the tram type that's involved in the incident. And we've put into the specification for that, or will when we go to market, to consider a more durable form of containment on the windows. And that means building a stronger body shell probably in order to do so. So that's all part of that debate, and that we've shared with the tram manufacturers, because there isn't laminate glass in trams. The body shells aren't strong enough, they're not built for that. And I think the other thing about it is, of course, is we don't want to be there again in any case. So it's all about prevention of that overturning, and that's where a lot of the focus has been as well.
Okay, so it's not any specific research. You looked at the research really was you looking at what the options are, and that's what you've now implemented.
Well, we did some destructive testing on the various forms of glazing and so on.
Is there any report on that that's available for us to look at?
Yes, we shared it with the rest of the tram industry. So if you'd like that,
that would be helpful. And is this being now applied to buses as well, or considered for bus safety?
We haven't had that dialogue yet, but we've got to go there in terms of considering what the... I mean, straight up, the focus has to be on prevention.
Yes. Yeah.
When you're into mitigation, you've lost the safety argument. So it really has to be there. So if we're talking about choices, my view is let's put the money into prevention rather than into mitigation.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member O'Connell, did you want to...
Thank you. Some of the points have been covered. I first of all like to take up, you haven't given FEMA almost a blank cheque on extra resources. I will challenge you back on the initial resistance from your members on the Guardian piece, because this was an intensely emotional time in Croydon, and it wasn't well received, the response by the union, and I think that needs to be noted, although I do understand the points that you've made.
Absolutely, and in response, it was an intensely emotional time, because drivers were picking up their trams at New Addington and being abused by people on the streets.
That's unforgivable.
Absolutely, and obviously only a tiny minority of people. Incredibly emotional time for the drivers there as well. Okay. And the drivers felt that they were being blamed, and at the time did not feel they were being supported. And I think that fed into the resistance to the Guardian device. But if the preliminary work had been done of engaging people, getting them involved, demonstrating the safety first of all that problem could have been...
The point needs to be made that there was a need and a demand, quite proper, for action. and often companies and institutions are criticised for delay, and any delay in the need to make safe the trams wasn't welcome at the time. But I think we've rehearsed that, and I think it's understood, Finn. But I just wanted to relay that.
But I think we still remain to be convinced that actually the Guardian is a real contribution to long-term.
Okay.
Well,
that will be tested. Also, I welcome and talking about prevention as opposed to reaction. Is any new model of tram and other vehicles will have that containment piece, because that was obviously the real tragedy around the whole thing. Really, I wanted a couple of more questions, and also I'd want to, also for the record, thank the work that particularly Jack has done with the community in Croydon, because I know you've been out in Croydon with the leader and the other leading politicians and the communities in giving reassurance over these last 2 years, and I'd like for the record to be grateful for that. But we've touched upon incident reporting and investigation already. So how are procedures, and probably this is for Jill initially, possibly Adrian, how have procedures been improved about the whole incident investigating procedure? Is there better procedures now that can be reported by passengers and also by obviously staff and others and managers as well? Is there better systems?
I mean, as John's already mentioned,
Yeah.
we've made it easier for customer complaints to be A, raised,
Yes.
and B, we reviewed that procedure, so it's a lot quicker, and it's prioritised. We can take action on high priority incidents, so that has definitely improved, and there's some tangible benefits come out of that. And TfL gets to see all the complaints that come in, so we can look for patterns and trends. So incident investigations improved.
Yeah. So there's a better flow of information. We've heard examples of passengers coming forward. We're hearing that there is an evolving better flow of information between drivers and managers and leaders in the organisation. So that's to be welcomed. Are there any other lessons to be learned that aren't necessarily specific in the recommendations? We've talked about an ideal around resources and staffing, and I think I'd like to put that on the record as something that might need to be a much bigger picture above the pay grade of perhaps even people even in this room. But are there other things that could be suggested?
Steve, that we do is our governance procedure has been reviewed, and every period we have a health and safety meeting between London Trams and ourselves, and every single incident that has happened is reviewed and actions come out of there. And so there's a two-way traffic between incidents that has happened within Toll and within London Trams, and we discuss those each period and resolve those issues.
That wasn't in place before.
They still had a health and safety in it, but there wasn't a level 2 that we have now,
Right.
which is where Mark and I meet, and anything that can't be resolved at those meetings then come to the general manager and myself, and then if we can't do that, it goes to John and Steve Montgomery. So there is a clear understanding now of how we resolve issues, and I have to say it's very effective, and we've moved on and we've resolved many issues around the running of the tram because of these very effective meetings.
Will there be that expectation? I mean, and lastly for me, again, we've heard about the support for the families, and bear in mind this was, as Jackie profoundly put, the trams are very much a community, because the people in New Addington use them, they also drive them, and sometimes they may even be controllers or managers. They're wonderful people in New Addington. So, and it's important that those families have been supported all the way through, and I thank all the organisations here to do so. I'd urge you to continue to do so, and I assume you will be continuing to support the families. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
I think just a big yes is enough for me, Chair, to continue.
Right.
Thank you.
Just mindful of time, we've got one more section before we change over. Our last section's on. Sorry,
Just a quick question, if I may. Yeah. As we're talking about the RAIB report, this question is to Jill. Do you think the report would have been enhanced had the RAIB received the TfL fatigue audit before its completion?
I think if you look at the revised, the second version of the RAIB report that they put out, they did say that with the information we provided did not significantly change anything that both us and Toll had provided during the course of their investigation, so it just sort of confirmed what they'd already discovered. So it's reinforces their own findings.
Is there? Can you explain exactly why the report wasn't sent in advance?
It wasn't sent as quickly as it should have been, because it was a genuine mistake, a very regrettable genuine mistake. As soon as we found out we hadn't done it, it was an oversight, we corrected it and sent it, but it fell between a gap between people who thought it should have gone out, and it was just an honest oversight. And then when we investigated that and found out it then got corrected and we sent it off again.
And that was a genuine oversight on 2 occasions, because it was asked for in September that it be sent, and it was then asked again in November that it be sent. Is that 2 genuine mistakes?
I think it was asked. We were asked in the January meeting to confirm whether we'd sent it, and it was then that we discovered we hadn't sent it.
Yeah, well, let me help you. It was
request input in
It was asked for on the 9th of September and again on the 22nd of November.
On the 22nd of November, we sent
and
the
requested
report.
on the 22nd of January whether it had been sent or not.
Yes, so we believed we had sent it, and when we investigated, we found that we hadn't, and it was an oversight, and it was a gap. And we're very sorry that we'd done that. We did apologise at the time, and then corrected it after the January meeting to send it. But it was an honest oversight.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last section on trams is just looking at Vision Zero, and I think, again, I was quite surprised that walking around the tram infrastructure wasn't discussed as part of the safety and recommendations. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Assemblymember Russell, who'll on these questions.
So yes, these questions are for TfL, so for Jill and John. And just, obviously TfL, you've got your Vision Zero action plan, but there are no specific targets within Vision Zero in the action plan for trams. So just generally, how do you think Vision Zero is shaping TfL's approach to tram safety? I don't know who wants to go first. Jill?
Well, the Vision Zero philosophy is sort of throughout TfL and how we manage safety. And it's making sure that everybody understands that no death, fatality and serious injury is acceptable. And if you look at what John is saying and looking at the investigations and what Jackie's been saying, prevention is all about preventing the accidents and working together to prevent them, and that's very much core through how we're managing the recommendations from the RAIB report, but also more of our tactical safety improvement recommendations as well. And it's making sure everybody understands why it's important in the wider community as well, and all that engagement and really much driving the Vision Zero. Also, our regulator has a very similar vision, which is zero fatalities and major injuries from the industry caused incidents. So the regulatory side of trams and how we're being managed and how we get scrutinised is very much aligned to the Mayor's TfL Vision Zero philosophy.
Thank you. John, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think it's a fair point. Should trams be, and other modes for that matter, apart from road-based ones, be more present within the Vision Zero programme? That's something that's worth taking away to see if we should make it more obvious that it is. But the reality is that the regulated environment in which we operate, we have no choice but to be zero tolerant around killed and seriously injured incidents. So it's there, it's absolutely there, but perhaps we could articulate it a bit better.
Yes, I mean, when we think about people, for instance, walking and cycling around trams, there's, there have been collisions in the past. There was a cyclist at the Morden Hall footpath crossing back in 2008, was killed in a collision with a tram, and the RAIB suggested that there should be some work done to the foot crossings to make sure that it was more obvious what needed to happen. And then there was an incident in 2013 when Roger de Clarke was killed. His bike got stuck in a tram line and he then fell into the path of a bus. And it took 5 years after his death for those safety improvements to be made. So I suppose the the question is, what more can be done to improve tram safety, particularly in relation to walking and cycling?
I think one of the things that we have been looking at across TfL is how the impact between vehicles, pedestrians and cyclists, how that environment can be improved. And one of the things that happened when we bought the new trams on the tram network was that the modern Stadler trams have an underrun protector. And that's a device that stops objects or people from falling underneath the wheels of the tram that wasn't on the original design, but was actually provided as an option by the manufacturer when we bought the Stadler trams. Now that's, when you think of the profile of the tram and making that profile more deflective perhaps for those incidents, is some of the work that we've started, I'm sure you'll hear about, in the bus environment too. So that has already been there. We've already started thinking about how to work with the environment, not just inside the tram but outside of the tram. And I think on our journey we would be wanting to specify that as part of the requirement when we buy new trams for the future, when actually in the past we took what the manufacturer proposed to us. So I think that sort of indicates, I think, the change in our thinking about how we're thinking about the external environment as well as the internal environment to the trams, which is important.
And what about the rails and the potential for people getting, sort of having problems with bikes in relation to rails?
Yeah, the on-street running risk is a challenging one. I mean, most of the tram network isn't on-street; it's off-street in our case, not in all cases. And that case where the person did get stuck, I think we did do some information sharing at the time about that. Do you remember the detail?
I don't know.
I'm happy to take that away and kind of research the background to what we did in that.
That would be useful. I mean, I think it's about guidance for, if new trams are being put in, but also for the environment around trams when they are on street, that there is proper Vision Zero guidance for local authorities and for TfL street design, if it's on TfL sections of road, that there is some thought in the guidance about how to make sure that it is as safe as possible for people who are walking and cycling.
We're also looking at how we can help the people who are the pedestrians or the cyclists as well, because trams can be quite quiet, for example. So part of this campaign, I think, at the moment on the trams are quiet, so how you can watch out for them and just be aware of the environment that you're in as well. So that's part of Vision Zero, to help people understand the environment they're cycling or walking in, as well as this two-way thing.
And we have put in, at each foot crossing, high-risk ones anyway, we put in a little chicane of fencing so it turns your whole body to look towards one way and the other as you walk across the foot crossing. That isn't prevalent in the rest of the tram industry in the UK, and certainly isn't in Europe, where the mentality is quite different. And is that working? And that's working, and that's changed things. It makes people look a little bit more. It doesn't, if they've got their earphones in and their hood up and they just walk straight across. How you ever deal with that is a sort of challenge that remains with us, but that's actually changed the way that people cross those crossings and made difference, I think.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, there is the issue of people slipping, tripping and falling inside trams, and we've seen the latest Health, Safety and Environment report for Q3 for 2018-19 said that a total of 94 customers were injured on TfL's rail network in the quarter. Of these, 10 incidents occurred on the tram network, and for the same period in 2017-18 there were only 5 incidents. Now obviously this is just one quarter and it's not a statistical trend, but that is a lot of people slipping, tripping, falling on the trams, and I just wonder whether you need to do more to be addressing that. Is that to do with the speeds that they're driven at? We've heard they've come down from 80 kilometres an hour to 70 kilometres an hour, but is there more that could be done around speed to reduce these incidents of
I think one of the challenges that
falling?
Jackie and Finn may wish to comment on too is around if an obstacle appears suddenly in front of a tram, then the tram driver has got different braking options available to them, but the most extreme of those does cause extreme stop, faster than a road vehicle. And therefore what the driver has to judge is whether to apply the extreme braking option and therefore induce some internal rapid braking, which causes a greater risk than if they put on a service brake.
Should a tram be travelling at a speed where there is a risk that something might appear in front, where extreme braking is necessary? Surely the speeds should be appropriate to the
But often
around.
people are walking across the road where they may not, where they perhaps shouldn't be, and walk out in front
But
of
that's what Vision Zero is about.
It is, absolutely.
That is about anticipating bad behaviour from people. Pedestrians wear headphones.
I agree.
They look at their phones. They're distracted by a small child who's crying because they want an apple or they want a chocolate bar or whatever it is. People are distracted. So should the trams be travelling at the kind of speed where that sharp braking is required through areas where they are mixing with pedestrians?
I'd love to invite you to come down to Croydon, because if you've ever been outside of East Croydon Station, I have to hand it to the drivers in this case. The way they handle the risk of pedestrians walking across the environment outside East Croydon Station is a testament to their skill, frankly.
Absolutely.
Because they do approach that, they use the bell, they use the horn if they need to, and the number of incidents that haven't happened there is incredible, and frankly,
of course,
in
and
that
that absolutely is to do with the skill of the drivers, but we shouldn't be putting the drivers in a position where they're forced to use an emergency brake, and should the speeds be being looked at across all the sections of
Well, I think
it's a good point.
But the hazard brake, actually the slower you are, you go with the hazard brake, the more impact inside that tram. We can show you, if you come down, we can show you the CCT of the effect of the hazard brake. Because, especially the CR4000, if you put the hazard brake on, and of course, for whatever reason, social behaviour is changing, all right? People don't want to sit next to each other anymore. So instead of people sitting on seats with their back to the seat, they sit like this, because they don't actually want to sit. Very strange behaviour. They actually don't want to sit facing the next person. So if the hazard brake comes on and you're sitting like this, you are going to go flying. So what Mark and I are doing is we're going to try and do a campaign that says, you need to. But the hazard brake is absolutely. It doesn't matter what speed you're going at. Once that hazard brake is applied inside the tram. So that's why the tram drivers have to...
But the hazard brake is much less likely to be applied if the tram is going slower overall.
No, it has to be, because people literally walk in front of them. Mobility scooters, cyclists, literally the tram's going really, really slowly, and some person, for whatever reasons, comes right out, and they have to apply that brake. It isn't about the speed. In fact, a hazard brake at a higher speed does less damage inside the tram than at lower speeds.
But your concern about the environment, and have we got the focus on that? The Vision Zero is a completely valid one, and we take that away to think about some more.
That would be if you could come back to us with, with some thoughts on that, and particularly about the impact of braking on people, and the need for drivers to brake, because if drivers are travelling at a slightly slower speed, then they are more able to see and anticipate the people that are coming along around them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say thank you to all of you who have paid tribute to the skills and professionalism of the drivers. And I'm sure Jackie will reflect on that when we meet at ACAS later today.
Oh, that was a very low.
That's great.
That wasn't nice.
Just scrutinise, yes, no, that's fine. Just really mindful of time. We've run over on this session now, and I know that some other members wanted to come in, but just to thank you all for your engaging discussions on this. This is something that we'll continue to monitor. There were some reports that TfL are going to send through to us. We've taken a note of that. We'll liaise with you. So just to thank our guests again, Jill Collins, Jonathan Fox, Finn Brennan, Adrian Jones and Jackie Town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a really 2-minute pause just to change over guests for our bus.
GLA, Committee Room 5, sound. 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 GLA, Committee Room 5, Sound.
Guests, we have Claire Mann, TfL Director of Bus Operations. We have Stuart Reid, TfL and Interim Director of Vision Zero. We have Sinisa Cica from Unite, who's the Chair of the London Advisory Committee. We have Tony Wilson, Abellio Bus Company Managing Director, and we have Tom Kearney, who's the founder of London Bus Watch and Transparency and Corporate Governance Campaign. So welcome to all of you this morning. I'm going to start with some of the questions on this section, and I'm just looking at the data from the last quarter in TfL. which is from September 2018 through to December 2018. There were over 1,098 injuries related to buses, so quite a high figure. And of that, 10% of those related in serious injury, killed or seriously injured, and there were 4 fatalities in that period. So a very small window, but 4 fatalities. So there are still a number of deaths on our roads. And in that quarter, 32% of all bus-related killed or seriously injured were vulnerable road users. What more do we think needs to be done to actually improve bus safety in relation to that key group? I'll start with Claire.
Okay. So I think it's fair to say that it's absolutely unacceptable that people can't go about their business using the bus network or walking around and cycling on London's roads with fear of being hurt. So clearly the numbers that we talk about are quite stubborn in terms of, you know, where we are with fatalities for sure. In terms of serious injuries, that's too high, that number. We launched the bus safety programme in 2016. And there are very many work streams within that programme. So it started off with sort of 6 key areas. And as time has gone on, because the programme develops as we learn more and more about the issues, we now have around 10 work streams. One of the key issues we have in terms of on-board injuries is how we can prevent people being harmed on board a bus. When a bus driver, we talked earlier about the skill of a tram driver, in terms of the skill of a bus driver driving around London's roads, the amount of congestion and various contradictions and issues they have to face every day is very challenging. So we need to find a way to ensure that people travelling on board our buses, which is what the majority of those numbers come from, can be protected, because very similarly, if we have somebody stepping out in front of a bus or a potential collision incident, the driver has to react to that, and often many of these injuries are as a result of the driver braking to avoid an incident and people falling on the vehicle. So we're looking at the interior design of the vehicle as part of our bus safety standard. We're also looking at what we can do to enhance customer behaviour on bus and make sure people are travelling safely. So you may be aware that we did actually trial an announcement last year, which didn't necessarily go down very well. It was my sort of claim to fame in terms of you know, how that went. But we did another trial more recently in Bromley and Bexley, which is an area where we have lots of certainly higher number of on-board slips, trips and falls, where we actually targeted announcements to sort of every 10 to 12 minutes, which were a bit more sort of nuanced in terms of asking people to be careful when they're moving around the vehicle, which was received very positively by the community. So we need to keep working in that area in terms of on-bus incidents. In terms of the broader issue of the stubbornly high numbers of fatalities on the network, we launched in October 2018, as I think many people came to or certainly invited, the bus safety standard, which is the new design of a London bus essentially. So in terms of how we eradicate fatalities, we know through Vision Zero that people will make mistakes and humans make errors all over, and it's about how we make the environment more forgiving for those. So the bus safety standard looks at the actual physical design of the vehicle. It also looks at various countermeasures that can be put on in terms of technology to assist the driver. So for example, advanced emergency braking or automated emergency braking is something that we have got in the plan for the future for buses. So if there is a object in front of the vehicle or a person that comes out in front of the vehicle will stop. Now, it's quite a difficult technology to put onto a big London bus where you've got people standing at the side of the road waiting to board a bus. It needs to be able to work out, you know, when it needs to stop. So that technology is still in production and development at the moment. But technology like that, things like the front of the design of the front of the vehicle, so that if somebody was hit by a vehicle, they would be deflected, is another way that we hope to reduce the amount of serious harm to people should they be struck by a vehicle. We're looking at devices for drivers, so if they by mistake put their foot on the wrong pedal, which can happen and has happened, there'll be an indicator light on the cab dashboard that will advise them that they've put their foot on the wrong pedal. So various different things we're looking at to see what we can do to make the challenging role of a driver easier and protect our vulnerable road users, which is our biggest challenge, really.
Is there anything you wanted to add on that, Stuart?
Well, all I would say is that across London as a whole, we absolutely recognise that the burden of death and serious injury resulting from collisions on the roads is unacceptably high. So the Stats 19 data for 2018 are still provisional, still being validated, but across London there will have been over 4,000 deaths and serious injuries on the road network specifically, and we're determined to drive that number down as part of the Vision Zero commitment that the Mayor has made and we have made. Vision Zero is not a brand new idea. It's been in sort of development and in delivery overseas since as late as or as early as the mid to late 1990s. And so there's a fairly well established and validated way of thinking about how to achieve reductions in deaths and serious injuries, starting from the point which Claire's already mentioned, which is that human error is inevitable. People aren't perfect and can't be perfected, so we have to create a sort of systemic environment within which people can make those errors without them being catastrophic. So the Vision Zero framework, and we've set this out in our Vision Zero action plan for London, covers appropriate speeds, safe speeds. It covers street design, as it were, the sort of stage upon which people act out their behaviours, the design of vehicles, and the behaviour of people within that, within that set of context. And I think the bus safety programme as set out aims to make progress in each of those areas. So the intelligent speed assistance, the speed monitoring is part of the speed pillar. Street design is something which we are looking at improving in a much broader context, not just around the bus safety theme, but around our Safer Junctions programme, a Healthy Streets programme, to create safe environments for people to be in. The bus driver training, which I'm sure we'll come on to, is about the behaviours of our drivers and their hazard perception and so on. So I think we have a pretty robust and internationally validated framework within which to develop this. The specific tactics around buses within that framework are sort of tailored to the way the bus network operates, and the fact that we have more influence over buses and bus operations than we do over some of the other vehicles and vehicle types and people travelling around the network.
Okay. Something you wanted to add in terms of maybe from the driver's perspective?
Yes, while I agree with my colleagues so far, any injury on our bus network is one too many. What we quite often overlook is those people who are actually driving our buses, and the stress and the fatigue they are put under, long hours, short breaks, pulled into the manager's office almost on a weekly basis on every little complaint. These days it's very easy for anyone on the bus just to open up and complain about the driver stopping 2 feet before the bus stop, stopping 2 feet past the bus stop, and so on. We liaise with TfL. We've got these tripartite meetings where we are trying to put our ideas forward, but we feel that the union's been seen as a tick box exercise, and you know, we feel that we are actually the experts in this field, and that if anyone can actually come up with ideas to improve the safety, is the bus drivers themselves. Being a bus driver these days isn't a job that we are proud of, and that shows in the shortage of people actually applying to be bus drivers, and the shortage that companies have to deal with.
Tony, from an operator's perspective, in terms of how we improve safety for these vulnerable groups?
I think there's probably more change going on now and more effort for change than there's ever been in my 40 years in the industry. I think there's a lot that we've probably assumed over the years that is now being challenged. A lot about shift patterns, about how drivers get fatigued or stressed, or all of those extraneous factors. I think we're getting more and more information almost daily, weekly. Vehicle design is being transformed actually, and the manufacturers are being challenged to come up with new ideas. We've got new players coming into the markets with new technologies. So there's a massive amount going on, and I think TfL should be applauded, if nothing else, for actually challenging the industry, challenging us as operators, challenging manufacturers, suppliers, and developers of new technologies that we'd never thought about before. I mean, this fatigue issue, the piece of kit that sits on the trams is now only one example of what you can get out there to look at fatigue. You know, when that first started, there weren't many options. Now there's a lot more options, and there's a lot more information being thrown into the pot for us all to consider. So, whereas, you know, for our example, and Sinisa will probably back me up on this, that we've tried for many years to put shift patterns in place that drivers want to do. So the drivers come and say, well, I want to do permanent earlies, I want to do nights, I want to do this and that. Some of the thinking now is actually we need to protect them from themselves, because some of those choices aren't actually working. So someone who works permanent nights and they say, I've got childcare responsibilities, and we say, well, okay, that's fine, yeah, you go home and you look after your kids, but actually, when do you sleep?
Yes.
Quite simply. And so there's a whole host of stuff that's coming at us. But all I can say is through my experience in my particular company, through talking to colleagues in other bus companies, through what we do in the Bus Operators Forum, we have a specific safety meeting. There's so much more awareness, and I think from an operator perspective, nobody wants to go out there and kill or seriously injure people. You know, the genuine aim from the operator fraternity is we know we've got to get better. We're just not, at the moment, quite sure how. I think there's so many different things we've got to get to grips with. You know, I think collision rates get challenged. We're seeing collision rates increase as road space has been reduced and we get more cyclists. All those different things you know, are not helping in the process, but there is a genuine will from the operators to make it better in many, many, many ways.
Tom, something.
I think if you're looking at bus safety, there's three things I would say. Transparency, accountability, and leadership, especially in corporate governance. If you recall, you may not know this, but the reason why TfL publishes this bus safety data every quarter is because I started campaigning back in my hospital bed when I started looking for the data. None existed. So we had the press report yesterday from GMB, which showed in the last 5 years, the average of people hit by buses is 3 a day, and the average of people killed or seriously injured is 4 per week. That's based on TfL's data, and the reason why we know that is because I survived and decided to do something about it. If you look at the data from 2018, 3 bus companies, which constitute 46% of TfL's bus fleet, are responsible for 54, or involved in 54% of those injuries. 3 bus companies. There are 10 bus operators. 3 of them, specifically Arriva, Comfort Del Gro, which is Metroline, and RITP, have basically the top 3. And the reason why I want data published is because precisely you can have this type of granularity. I'm not accusing these companies of being worse or better, but now that we know that those companies are involved in the most collisions, you can then begin to research. Maybe it's where they're operating. Maybe it's policies they have. I've seen Metroline. I have a thing here that shows 14-hour minimum on a shift that's been agreed by the union. I thought to myself, if you're on a 14-hour shift and you're commuting an hour each way, that's 16 hours. That leaves you 8 hours, or actually less than 8 hours, to be with your family. And then guess what? If you got kids that are awake, or you've got issues in your neighborhood or whatever, you're getting 5 hours of sleep. And those guys are being rostered 5, 6, 7 days in a row. So issues raised by the Unite representative are absolutely true. Fatigue is a huge issue. We heard in the last session with Tram, fatigue, fatigue, fatigue. And personally, talking with bus drivers and being in contact with bus drivers from many unions across the country, fatigue driving is their single biggest worry.
Okay, no, thank you. One of the things that we saw in that data, which you rightly pointed out, is really interesting and good to delve into, was the fact that a number of the bus-related injuries, similar to the ones on the tram, were as a result of slip, trips and falls. Is there more that could be done to address this? Is there more that could be done? You know, we touched on the Vision Zero element, but is there a lot more that can be done apart from the announcements as well?
So we mentioned announcements, which is really, I mean, it's really difficult with announcements not to annoy people. Quite a few people said, I know the bus is going to move and obviously I'm going to hold on. Well, it isn't that obvious, because we talked earlier about technology and people with mobile phones and bags, and they just distracted. So there's the customer approach and the whole behavioural issue. We're looking actually at the flooring on the vehicles as well. So as part of the bus safety standard phase 1, which has now been published, the actual anti-slip flooring nature needs to be just right. So in terms of not being able to slip but not causing harm should you, because it can be too rough, is a very fine balance. We're actually looking at the flooring, so we've specified that now. But I think, I don't know if Stuart wants to talk about the sort of general Vision Zero approach. It is about how we train our drivers as well. So Stuart briefly mentioned the new driver training that we've got, which is just about to kick off actually. And this driver training, we've called it Destination Zero because it feeds into the Vision Zero approach. We've worked really closely with the union on the development of the training. We've looked at technology to make sure that if we can't get every driver out onto a bicycle to give them the feeling of what it's like to be a vulnerable road user, we use 360 technology to show them what it looks like to be sitting in the bus, as well as on a bicycle next to a bus that passes closely, and as a pedestrian. We're trying to give the driver the sense of how we all need to play together to ensure that we create this safe environment. So that also introduces the issue around passengers on board the bus, and if you have to avoid a collision, how you do that in the best possible way. So as Sinisa rightly said, it's very, very challenging for drivers. Now, I absolutely feel this. I used to work in the rail industry and drive trains, and I know that you could focus on the line ahead, you had no distraction from traffic, you didn't have to deal with customers, and you could really focus. It's not like that for a bus driver. There are so many factors that affect the ability to concentrate, and our job is through training, development and technology to make it as easy for them to be able to deal with all of these challenges. Sinisa also mentioned the tripartite meeting, and I think, you know, I came into the role a couple of years ago now, and I know that meeting has been happening for some time, but we're starting to really get into discussing how we can do more for the well-being of our drivers as well. So we're just about to launch a health bus, a bus that will go from garage to garage and give health advice to drivers in terms of well-being, you know, what they can do. And also, we mentioned fatigue earlier, and you'll know that we've commissioned Loughborough University to do some fatigue research. We've just got the initial findings of that back now, so we will be publishing that in the summer. When we've been through it, we've gone through it with Loughborough and we've understood what it's telling us. But that research has involved Unite the Union, our bus operators and TfL very closely to ensure that everybody understands that what comes out of that will not be comfortable for anybody actually. We're all going to have to decide what the best approach is going forward, because it is about the employer, it is about the employee, and it's about how we understand how individuals are and all the different factors that bring together fatigue. And it's about us all doing stuff together. So it's going to be very challenging, but we need to take action. And I think when the research was launched, one of the first things that happened was Loughborough looked at all of the literature available on bus driver fatigue. There's hardly anything out there. This hasn't been done before. We are leading the way here because we realise we don't have enough data and evidence as to what the issues are. So the research has gone into lots of different elements to really start to pull out what we need to know. So I'm really pleased that we've done this, but we know that the road ahead in terms of getting the right outcomes is going to be long and it will be challenging, but we need to do something about it. So all of these things add together to ensure that we protect the public, the drivers and the customers from harm. And I think, you know, I'm really excited by it, but also nervous about the challenge ahead, I think it's fair to say.
No, that's good.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Member Bailey.
Just a quick thing, just quickly talk about the driver 14-hour shifts and the three companies with the highest collision data. Has somebody done an analysis on that? Is it because of the routes they drive? Is it because of the contracts that they give to their employees? When are these incidents happening? Are they the beginning of the shift, the middle, the end? Are they in the day, the night?
TfL does not publish this data. This was published by GMP. TfL doesn't publish any data on its website that shows this type of analysis. This was done by the union.
Okay, does this analysis exist?
So obviously we publish quarterly statistics which will tell you by garage where incidents occur. So what Tom refers to is the facts of the matter. In terms of operators in London, and Tom mentioned some of them are working in very constrained central London areas. Others.
So just to stop you, I don't want to focus on the operators, I want to focus. Does that data exist? I might even understand why TfL doesn't publish it. But does the data exist that looks at where the incidents has happened, which company is involved, what time in that driver's shift it's involved? Because it strikes me, if you're trying to make a change around safety, they are the fundamentals, aren't they? Who is having an incident, where, when and why? Does that data exist?
So for every incident that involves harm, there's an investigation which will determine all of those factors. The driver report will say when it happened, what shift they were on, what location it was at. So all of that information exists. When it comes to serious injuries, which we have a NIMI process, we call it, so it's a notification of a serious incident. The investigation is very deep in terms of how we understand the root cause of what happened that day, and TfL also reviews that investigation in conjunction with the operator.
Okay. I'm not accusing anybody. I'm just trying to. So then, what is done with that data? How does that play into your Vision Zero? Because if I listen to Sinisa speak, it sounds like the data exists, but it's not being used. And I think I'm asking you, how is that data informing your next steps? Let me just add something else, which is slightly tangential. Because I ride the bus all the time, and I wasn't involved in this announcement trial. I am a fairly mobile person, and I would like that announcement, so I'm not sure why it doesn't happen everywhere else. And the other thing that strikes me on the bus is all the hard points there is to hit. Now, I understand the temptation to have lots of poles so that I can hold on so I don't fall in the first place, but then, of course, I fall against these poles. It strikes me that the bus cushion doesn't wrap all the way around a chair, so my head will connect with the hard part of the chair. How comes these simple things are not being looked at?
Okay, they are. So, in terms of the interior of the vehicle, the way we structured the bus safety standard works, this is about all of the things you mentioned in terms of the design and the materials, is we looked at all of the police data on serious incidents that had happened on the network, and we got to root cause and then came up with a set of countermeasures to prevent those things happening. So in terms of the first stage of the bus safety standard, that has addressed all of the immediate things that we know we need to do to try and prevent serious harm. The interior of the vehicle and the actual materials we use for the poles, etc., is part of bus safety standard. We don't yet have the solution, so we've gone out to the industry, the manufacturers and the market and said, tell us how we can prevent this issue, because we know there are various different coverings. Things like the height of a seat is something that can cause injury because people are going over and back with lower seats. So we're looking at all of that as part of the continued research. So the manufacturers and the industry are looking at interiors. The one thing we could do quite quickly is specify an anti-slip flooring, so that's what we've done. But in terms of developing the next level of interior design, that's what will come into the next phase.
Sorry, because I'm trying to help cheer out and be quickly. Now, because your answer is satisfying me. Okay. But I just want to understand, you have this data about where, when and why the accidents are happening. Are you using that to speak to any operator, particularly about what they should be doing next?
So we launched a year ago a safety performance indicator or index for each separate bus operator across London, which is an index which has got 41 different measures within it that gives us the health of that operator in terms of their safety performance. So each period, the results of their performance in that period are put through the system to come up with their performance index. My performance team and safety team go and speak to the operators to discuss their results in terms of their performance, but also we run an assurance programme where every quarter the safety team go and they assure those results. So in terms of an audit process, where in the past we might have gone and checked processes, we don't do that anymore. We go to the operator, we meet with some drivers and some garage managers, and we say to them, can you tell me the last time someone spoke to you about safety? Can you show me some evidence of the briefings you've had recently? We test the processes and procedures through an assurance programme. So when we meet with the operators, we talk about their actual performance in terms of what happened that month and if the trend is going up or down and where are the hot spots. They tell us where the hotspots are because they've got the data, which they didn't have in this amount of detail before. We then talk about their assurance and whether or not that's becoming healthier, because of course we can have a period where you have an unfortunate set of circumstances, but if your underlying processes and behaviours are improving, then that should bring a betterment in the end. And then we challenge them for action plans where we're not comfortable with that. So, I mean, I was going to ask Tony if he can comment, because at the end of this, because we do it to you, in terms of that relationship, what it's like.
Yeah, just to your point about the granular detail of incidents, I mean, certainly we have done, and I'm sure my colleagues in other operators have done, we've looked at time of day, time in shift and all that sort of thing, and it would have been fantastic if there had been some direct correlation. We could have said, there was always at the end of shift after they'd done like 12 hours. It was completely randomised. It was extraordinary. There was no clear pattern, unfortunately, which was not very helpful, actually. But in terms of I mean, one of the other questions that may come up, incentivising safety. How do the operators act in the right way? What strictures are put on us to force us, if you like, to look the right way? The Safety Performance Index, I think, has done possibly more than even maybe it was intended to do in terms of not having a direct incentive, but what other mechanism could you put in place that would get operators doing the right thing? The Safety Performance Index across its, 40-odd different KPIs, huge basket, if you like. We, and I know my colleagues, are out there trying to improve each one of those measures to get our Safety Performance Index score up. Now, I can say for ourselves, we have seen a steady increase over time, which is exactly what it was designed to do. But I think across the network, we've also seen an increase. And it is focusing our minds on the right things. And you can't just go and cherry pick. You've got to do all of those measures. There's no good being brilliant in 3 and rubbish in the rest. You've got to tackle all of them.
I'm just mindful of time. I've got quite a number of colleagues that want to come in. So I would ask that Assembly members exercise restraint. We've still got 4 sections to cover on this area. Assembly member Copter.
So I will exercise restraint by not asking questions.
Thank you. Can we move on then? Was there something, Brennan, that you wanted to come back on?
I was just going to add something in regards of, I know Claire said the consulting drivers, but we've never seen drivers being consulted on the floor at the garages about any sort of safety. The problem we have, the drivers are being, rather than being educated, they're being punished for everything that happens out there. And that's a big problem, because when you have someone who's done 10 years of driving without any problems and then gets involved in a serious collision, those drivers are usually, the cure for that is from the operating side, is to push them through the door. But that impacts every other driver. People are very unhappy. They are seen as numbers, expandable, and they don't feel respected. If we change that and we start putting more initiative on educating our drivers, the safety will improve.
Can I just say that as an operator, I would disagree with that. I'm sure there's pockets of it, and I can fully understand it, but that isn't a blanket scenario.
The safety performance indicator, Caroline's asked for that a number of times. TfL publishes bus performance based on timeliness, not on the safety performance index. And I would say, as someone for transparency, this should be published every quarter and visible to the public.
So we'll be publishing that this quarter with the quarterly one results. So
you've had it for a year, though. You've had it for an entire year, yeah?
Yeah, so what we said,
so
I think it's, sorry, Tom.
I would want to see all year's results.
Okay,
just quarters.
When you bring in a new indicator, like we did in TfL 2 years ago for the TfL bus network, in terms of our whole operation, you need to bed it in and ensure you understand what the data is telling you. We've done that now. We've got the data. We've had a year of it running. We can see that there were some tweaks that needed to be made to make sure that the baskets were weighted effectively. We've now done that, and we're in a position to produce that going forward. So
you were able to publish the whole year then, since you have the data?
So we'll be, yes, I think we've got a year's of, yes.
Okay.
Great.
So it'd be great if we have that. Assembly Member Bacon.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be as quick as I can. I'm going to go back to the statistic that Mr. Kearney gave early on. Kearney, I beg your pardon. You said, I think it was 54% of incidents were with 3 bus operating companies out of 10.
They constitute 46% of the bus fleet.
Right, yes, but 54% of the incidents, is that
The
what you said?
KSI incident, collisions.
KSI, because that was the first question,
No.
so the killed or seriously injured questions. Assembly Member Bailey asked you, Ms Mann, whether the data bus company by bus company exists. I didn't quite get the answer. You did say that obviously you investigate every single incident and you do it very thoroughly, but that's fine. I think the question that was being asked, and certainly the answer I wanted to hear, was whether you keep that data bus company by bus company, do you?
So in terms of incidents that happen, yes, we've got it by bus, we do have it by garage. So by garage indicates bus company.
Fine,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, we do.
Bit of a layman at this, hence me not
It's all right,
automatically
no,
making
it's
the
fine.
distinction. But you don't publish that data?
No. We
Is there a
publish,
reason for
we
that?
do publish, hold on, now I'm getting myself confused. Can you help me, Stuart? We do publish garage data, don't we?
Yeah, I believe we do. I mean, I think the data is collected for every single incident. It's not the only input. We have the data from our own investigations. We have safety concerns raised by the public. We have data from the police. So what we aim to do is sort of integrate all of those things and some of the operational practices like route risk audits, which are carried out by the operators that identify points of high location. All of that is put together to help us manage the safety of a route and ensure the drivers are equipped with the knowledge they need. And where there are patterns in that data, they then feed into the bus safety programme and indeed to other safety programmes. I mean, again, this is just provisional data from 2018, but collisions between buses and pedestrians account for 2% of the KSIs, whereas collisions between cars and pedestrians account for 18%. So in the broader Vision Zero context, we're looking at things like street design and hotspot locations, not only with respect to the bus, but also the broader safety outcomes.
That's fine. What I was trying to get to was how deep the analysis of the bus companies goes. Because that is quite a startling statistic for, I mean, I'm a layman.
That's one of the things we're going to come on to next in terms of interrogating that database.
In which case, I'll hold fire, Chair, and perhaps I'll come in on that off the back of someone else's question in a moment.
Yeah, Chair, if I may raise issue about compatibility of bus safety data systems. I believe TfL operates Incident Reporting Information System, IRIS. You got Stats 19, and you got what's Case Overview Preparation Application Code. Can I raise questions both with Claire and Stuart as to what progress has been made to make these three more compatible? The issue was raised in our Transport Committee report in 2017, whether there was logic in amalgamation of SS Stats 19 and IRIS. Okay, can you comment on that?
So just from an overview point of view, the Stats 19 data is far less in terms of incident data than the IRIS data, because the IRIS data is everything that is inputted to our system. So Stats 19 will only pick up what the police report at the time of serious incident, whereas IRIS is every incident that the operator has is reported in. So it's a bigger data set. In terms of bringing the two together, that's where the challenge lies. So I'm going to hand over to Stuart because he's been doing a piece of work on the data piece specifically. So
yeah, absolutely. So Stats 19 is a nationally defined data set. So the police and collect according to instructions from the Department for Transport, which is set out in a companion document called Stats 20, which sets out specifically what is and what is not to be included in that data set. And then we, as a highway authority, are obliged to collate that information and publish it. Stats 19 specifically excludes certain things. So, for example, if there's a collision and one of the people involved in that collision dies more than 30 days after the incident, that Stats 19 excludes that as a record of a fatality. If the collision is determined to be as a result of a suicide, that's excluded. if the collision takes place off the public highway, for example, in a car park or on private land, that's excluded, and so on. So there's a whole series of nationally defined elements to Stats 19, and we're obliged to report on that basis. As Claire says, IRIS is much more comprehensive. So, for example, where Stats 19 would require us to exclude a record if it was determined that the incident was a result of natural causes, IRIS would incorporate it, whether or not. So IRIS is a more comprehensive database. It's our database, and we're able to go deeper into it. We've looked at the scope to amalgamate the two, and to be frank, the two data sets are not compatible. They're different sets of data collected for different purposes by different agencies according to different criteria, because the police in collecting their information are primarily collecting information to determine whether a crime has been committed and to inform the coroner. We are carrying out a related but different investigation to understand how we can act, how we can respond, how we can get to the root of that particular incident. So the risk is that by amalgamating the data sets, you make them both useless because they're not directly compatible.
If I can pick up an issue which you're reviewing as well, and that is to do with correlation of hospital episode data, where there are some difficulties. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, so hospital episode data is another data set. It's collected by the police. On a sort of project by project basis, we've attempted to follow a specific incident through the different data sets. What we've found is that it's almost impossible to track the majority of incidents all the way through, because there's no, which sounds a little bit sort of bureaucratic, but there is no common identifier. There's no mandated identifier that says this incident that happened we're going to call 1B, and that identifier will follow the data right the way through the entire process through the NHS, beyond into rehabilitation and so on. So what we actually find is a great deal of effort has to be put into accuracy, even of the Stats 19 data set, because an incident may happen, somebody may appear to only be slightly injured, they may then develop complications, their medical status may change, or vice versa. And so there's even at that sort of relatively limited level, there's a great deal of effort and time goes into trying to produce accurate Stats 19 records, and the conditions don't really exist to enable us to track an individual all the way through the NHS and sort of back into normal life beyond.
Yeah, we got this obviously very specific data systems which are technical and complex in their own way. How can these systems be made more accessible as well as easier to understand for stakeholders, for example,
yes,
and other operators?
So we publish annually the confirmed Stats 19 records for the whole of London for all qualifying incidents, and we publish that both as a report and as a data set. So that's already out there, but the data issues are complex, and one of the things that we're looking at is how we actually spend less time talking about the data as a sort of set of technical considerations, and more about the core of the issue, which is that real people are being killed and injured on the road.
It is about safety, and it is about
So we're looking, for example, at whether we develop a much simplified sort of data dashboard that allows any member of the public to review how we're doing without needing to delve into the detail of what's included in Stats 19 and what isn't. We, at the end of last year, we experimented with this at a borough by borough level. We took the data for every London borough for 2017, which was the completed data set at that point, and turned it into a dashboard for that borough, which identified what the trend was in that borough, who was being injured, and in what types of incident they were being injured, and really tried to simplify it, because it's very easy to dive off into sort of discussions about the statistics and lose the point of it. So, and that dashboard on a borough by borough level was something that we actually took a conscious decision to promote quite widely. So we didn't just send that to road safety officers. We sent that to borough leaders. We sent it to elected members to say, look, you need to know what's going on in your borough, and we're sort of emboldened by that. We're now looking at what we might do in a more public-facing way that kind of cuts through the table, the tables full of figures and the trends and so on, and tries to explain the story more in a more straightforward way.
And that's good and very helpful and interesting. Question is, whilst yes, borough and local authority leaders, representatives are made aware of this, are you also making local, for example, public transport users associations, etc., stakeholder groups, making them aware that this data is available in the manner you mentioned?
So all of those borough fact sheets have been published on our website. We have a lot of engagement with stakeholders across all sorts of domains, and most of those. Most of the stakeholder groups with which we have direct contact are fully aware.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Assembly Member Pigeon, but I just wanted to come back on the point that Assembly Member Bacon raised, the individual bus companies and why that information is not readily available.
So we publish aggregate information at a garage level. I think there's a sort of broader discussion. I'm aware that what we are trying to do, there was discussion in the earlier session about a just culture, and I think what we're trying to do is find the right balance between engaging the bus companies, the bus operators, bringing them in, having frank discussions and encouraging them to be transparent and open with us, versus disincentivising them to be open and transparent with us. So our position is that the data which we put out on our website is accessible to the kind of information that was released yesterday by the GMB. That was based on our data, but we're trying to move a culture here. And so we're just trying to find the right balance between understanding the problems and working with the companies versus exposing them in a way which may not reflect the full circumstances that they're operating in.
Assembly Member Bacon, quickly.
Yeah, just off the back of that answer, I'd like to ask Mr. Kearney what his view of that answer is.
I met Mike Brown once in March 2018. He deigned to meet with me and Gareth Powell. And I asked him specifically, as a former listed company director, as the director of companies now, involved in safety industrial, I said, as an industrial manager, board member, I'm obligated to know what's going on in my company. If unsafe behavior is not taking place, then I'm obligated to do something about it, or I go to jail in a jurisdiction where I'm a director. I said, what is preventing TfL from mandating the bus companies to be much more upfront about sharing this data? He said, if TfL didn't push them, they wouldn't report it. And I thought to myself, then you've got a management issue here. You've got a corporate governance issue here. This is not an issue of, I don't think these companies are malign. I don't think these companies are bad, and we have Tony Wilson here for the second time. I don't see Metroline, Arriva, or RTP here, but it's probably worth having a chat with them, or any of these other companies. I think there is a corporate governance issue here. And I think that statement from the Commissioner was chilling. That if TfL is incapable of getting companies, which it contracts 100% of their income, them to report, then we have a safety culture issue. I don't feel I've got it from Abellio because he's here. And this is the second time I've seen Tony. And also I met him at a Cyrus conference. It turns out Abellio does very well relative to its percentage of buses. And its situation is improving. I can't say that for all of them.
So can I respond to that? Okay. In terms of accountability for the safe operation of each bus company, clearly the managing director of that bus company takes that responsibility. In terms of the safe operation of London bus operations, I take that responsibility because we let the contracts to the 10 operators that run those services. It's a London bus with a TfL roundel on the side of it operated by a private operator. Every single injury and fatality hits me personally because that's my operation as far as I see it. In terms of responsibility and accountability, Tony's here. Tony came to the last session and it was suggested it'd be a good idea if Tony returned to talk about the progress that's happened. But when I meet with the bus operators, I have to say over the last 2 years, the absolute change in culture in terms of sharing between MDs of what they're doing to improve safety has shifted fundamentally. When we first started out on this journey, perhaps 3 years ago, there was a safety meeting that occurred, but it was talking about data and trends, but there wasn't really any discussion around the table about what we're doing to change this. What I see now are managing directors from all companies, and actually we go around the table until every MD talks about their latest initiative, sharing what's working for them. Now don't forget, all of the bus operators in London are competing against each other for work in London, but when it comes to safety, it's fundamentally core that needs to be given. So it shouldn't be an issue that you do not share on. So we've now got established a safety forum where people are coming forward and saying, I've trialled this thing in my operation, I don't know how it's going to go, it works for us. Another operator may say, well, I'm not sure that's going to work for me, but it's being shared. The other thing is in terms of safety innovation, we're trying to get operators to come forward with new ways of doing things because we don't have all of the answers. These groups are part of big owning groups that run rail and bus, and there is lessons to be learned across the industries. And as I have said before, my background is rail, and when I came to bus it was different, but the emphasis on safety from the operators was no different. It was just the challenge was far more difficult. On the rail network, you have an incident, you close the system down, you investigate, you get to the root cause. On the road network, it's very difficult to do that. So the change that we've brought in between the bus operators who were absolutely up for this and TfL is that when we have an incident, a serious incident, not necessarily just a fatality, but serious injury, we will go to site within 48 hours together and we will look at that environment. And even if the driver is not at fault, which in most cases they are not at fault in the case of a fatality, we look at the environment and we say, what could we do here to have prevented that happening? And that shared discussion between operator, authority and police is really important for me because it's showing a different level of maturity. And safety culture is about everyone prioritising this and coming to work with that in mind. And we need to make sure, to Sinisa's point, that drivers feel that we have a safety culture shift and that they are safe to report, and that's where we're working towards together as well, because it's important people can say if they're concerned about certain locations on the network or certain practices, and we rely on our operators to have that forum with their drivers. But we also, I've seen a change in the amount of information coming through TfL. We get shared a lot of information from Unite the Union because we've established a relationship which is tripartite, so we do hear more. And I can see there is a shift in terms of the culture, but it is a really long journey. We've got 24,000 bus drivers in London, 6 million passengers a day, 9,000 vehicles on our roads, and it's difficult to get to every single person and really convince them that we're on that journey. But that is my role with the bus operators. So I feel that we are on the right track here, but we have an absolutely phenomenal way to go in terms of the amount of work to get all of these elements fitting together. So the driver training that's just about to be launched, it's all about the driver and how we help them and they get a feeling for the challenges to our vulnerable road users. But we want them to have their voice about what they're concerned about, and that gets fed back to the operators, and we do something about that. So I just wanted to say all of that just to kind of put a bit of context around what I've seen in 2 years in terms of shift of focus, really.
Just bring in Assembly Member Pigeon's last point.
I just want to pick up the data issue and the accuracy of it. Are you absolutely satisfied that the data you're collecting details all collisions between buses and pedestrians? And I'll give an example. Last year I asked a mayoral question about incidents involving pedestrians using pedestrian crossings and buses. And when I got the information, you had missed off a very high profile horrible case of someone who's had life-changing injuries that have been all over the press, wasn't even in the list. So how can we have confidence that you have all of the accurate data?
I'm aware of the error that was made in responding to that mayoral question. That was a human error, but in fact
it was on your system.
The incident was on the system and had been investigated in the normal way, but it was not included in the answer to your question, and that was a human error.
Right, so you have confidence, you have got the data, it's just reading that data in that incident you were...
I think as Claire has said, we rely on the operators to collect and provide that data. We've come an awful long way in creating an environment within which they are confident to provide that data, and I think we can be more confident today than we've ever been, but I don't think there's ever any ground for complacency of saying, well, the data's done. I think we need to keep at this.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Going to move on to improving bus safety, and you've touched on the bus safety standard and some other initiatives, and the section is Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Can I just go back though to the point raised by Assembly Member Bailey and Tom, really, in relation to domestic driving hours. And Tony, can I ask you a question in relation to your own company? There's this domestic driving hours which Tom talked about, maximum of 14 hours on duty. Do you have some similar?
16 hours on duty, actually.
16
is the legal, maximum.
It's 15 hours for a HGV driver.
Yes, it's UK domestic rules which we don't operate. It's 16 hours.
So can I ask you what the maximum hours are in your business, please?
We don't try and, or I don't attempt to schedule more than about 11.
No. Okay.
But and there are other legal limits as well that we and I know other bus companies all work well within. And over time, that has migrated more towards the middle ground, to be honest. So the extremes are not there in London operation, apart from in times of very heavy traffic congestion or disruption.
Do you think, Tony, that your bus company has one of the better records on bus safety? Do you think the fact that you do limit it to 11 hours is
to an extent, although I think although we haven't got the final outcomes from the fatigue study, I think what we're now being challenged with is some different thinking, that actually length of shift is not one of the prime factors. It's time of start and breaks and all the other extraneous things that are far more challenging actually than the length of the day. And it's say that the information that we looked at to think, were we getting all of our incidents at the end of the shift when people were either tired or they're rushing back to the depot, they want to finish? Well, we weren't actually. It's more in the first half of the shift.
But this is for your
and
company.
This is where
for your company.
No, I think we're pretty representative in the way we operate. There's nothing different. There are some geographical things that. In outer London, you get less incidents than you do in central London, so you can't do direct comparisons on companies. We've got two companies, one in south and south central, as you know, one in outer West London. They have different collision rates. The rates of passenger injury, on-bus injury, are much higher in outer London than they are in central London. Our single decks get far more on-bus injuries than our double decks. So you can't draw direct comparisons easily. You have to aggregate the data and get something to really look at it. But yeah, there's far more questions actually than we're able to answer now about work patterns and length of day. So length of day, it may be different from a tiredness point of view, but tiredness is not fatigue. And I think that's what we're starting to learn a lot more about now, but really it's very early days, I think, in the bus industry, as Claire was saying. I think there's one piece of research in Sweden, and that's about it for bus drivers. Yeah. There's nothing else ever been done.
It's a new area that needs more investigation.
If I can then turn to you, Sinisa, not wishing to repeat all that was said around doing the calculation on the number of hours you're left with after you've done a 14-hour shift, and I don't think anyone actually mentioned about getting out of bed, having a shower and having breakfast, which would add another hour, take another hour away. This Metro Line agreement is done in agreement with the unions.
Yes, but unfortunately these agreements are very historical. They've been done, some of them 15, 20 years ago, and now when you're actually approaching the company from the union perspective and say, we feel that this is not right and we would like to have a change, they are not very forthcoming and willing to listen actually.
You're saying that you've approached, as Unite approached Metro Line, asked them to reduce the hours, and they're refusing to do it. Is that what you're saying to us?
On many occasions, yeah.
That's quite a revelation. Thank you, that's very useful. All right, if I can, thank you. Can I move on then to the, back to Tony. If I move back to you, Tony, in relation to the trial you did with Mobile Eye, which is, I think, quite successful, and
very
hats off to you
successful
for doing it
yeah.
as well. It's very
Yeah.
interesting. How did that work for you?
I think it gave us a far more measurable result than we ever probably anticipated. So we had just over 60 vehicles fitted with it over a good period of time. So it was about 9 months or so that we ran the trial, and yourself and Caroline saw it in action. So it was a good sample size. We actually increased it during the period to try and include another route that had a high incident rate. So we were trying to get a sort of a decent critical mass of incidents. Now, a horrible thing to say, but we wanted to look at it on routes that actually had a problem, in inverted commas. So in the end, across the whole trial period, across those routes, we saw an excess of a 25% reduction in avoidable collisions. So that's where we've deemed that the driver could have done something differently. This is not necessarily blameworthy, non-blameworthy. It's talking about the driver's actions as a professional driver. Could they have taken a different set of action? Could they have done something to avoid the incident? We also saw a knock-on benefit, which we didn't really expect, actually, of a slightly higher reduction in on-board avoidable incidents. So people on the bus, we had less incidents of people falling over and hurting themselves. So yes, it's hard to argue statistically that it wasn't a success, that it actually had a meaningful outcome. And even if it was only a 10% reduction, it would have been worth doing. So we've now decided of our own volition to actually fit it across our whole fleet. As of yesterday, we had about 100 vehicles already fitted of our 700. Across all of Abellio's fleet in London. We only operate in London. By the end of the year, we'll have all of our 750 vehicles at that time fitted. And we hope, clearly, that we can replicate that across our whole operation. If we get 25% reduction, I shall be deliriously happy. If we got 10, if we got 5, if we saved one serious incident, arguably it'd be worth it. So yes, it was a very successful trial.
Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting. Okay, so Stuart, you're the director, aren't you? Why are you refusing to mandate this across all your bus companies? Seeing we're having 25% reduction in injuries on the road, we're having even more reductions on onboard injuries. You're going on virtue signalling around Vision Zero. You've got an answer here, massive reductions in injuries. Why are you not mandating all...
So I have to defer to Claire, who's the Director of Bus Operations.
All right, okay. Well,
okay?
and you just said, actually, a few seconds ago, that every injury, you feel every injury. Well, here, I can help you save a quarter of the injuries. Absolutely. Why are you not mandating it?
We're not mandating it because we launched a safety innovation trial last year, which Mobileye was Abellio's trial, and that has proven a success for Abellio in a small proportion of the fleet. So Tony's taken a decision, which I 100% support, to fit it to all of the Abellio fleet. Now, we have got lots of trials happening across all of the operators of various technology, and we need to make a decision based on the future design of the bus and the technology we're going to put on it, which we can put into the bus specification that all buses should be built by. And the issue we have with immediately applying a new technology to the whole fleet is that as we keep layering on different technologies without having the proper package of technologies to have the best result, we could bring in more conflicts and issues in terms of the technology, the burden on the driver, and not really seeing the bigger picture. So the good thing about the bus safety standard is the first phase of the bus safety standard has mandated certain things. The trial that Tony has mentioned and the Seeing Machines trial that's happening on RATP, and I believe Go Ahead now are trialling the same kit, which is the Tram system. Once they come to a position where we're in the next phase of the bus safety standard, which we launch at the end of this year to look at further technology, we can decide what the right model is we feel we need to be specifying. Because at the moment, we could end up putting different systems on different vehicles and having too many conflicting systems. Now, Tony's going down that line because it's worked for Abellio. We need to look across the piece and make sure we have the right specifications. So we're not stopping any initiative that's going to reduce injury, but mandating it to every operator or into the specification, we need to do that in a proper, consistent way with the business case underneath it. So we will continue to develop, and that's why things like the interior design is still in development. We know there's an issue. We need to find the right specification rather than going out and fitting different things and finding it didn't work. And I think I would criticise the way we might have done things in the past, where people have come up with an initiative and we've just stuck it on a vehicle and then realised it's perhaps not working. We need a proper programme now, which we've started with the bus safety programme, which is evidence-based, relating to injury types, and we fit the right systems according to that. So I'm not saying that we won't go down the line of Mobileye, but at the moment we're not ready to say it's Mobileye for every vehicle. I've got to be affordable as well.
Aren't you conflating two issues here? I mean, absolutely right that you should do trials and so on as what a future bus might look like, and some of the automatic. I mean, I was in a car myself the other day. A pedestrian was walking across. It was a car that I had. Walking across my front, I thought I'll miss him by a mile. The car didn't think so, and the car just stopped me, which is fine. But that's an expensive thing to retrofit, whereas the Mobileye product, and I'm not selling Mobileye, there are probably similar products available, is for retrofitting, and you can see a massive reduction in injuries and so on. So yes, of course, you should take the time in deciding what a future bus should look like and whether it's got wrap-round seats and interior design and but that's for a new bus. We're talking about the thousands of buses that are running up and down London, injuring hundreds of people. And here we have a way of getting closer to Vision Zero with very little expense, relatively speaking. Retrofitting the buses that are running now. I don't understand why you don't get that.
Because I do get that, but in terms of affordability in the round and the amount of things that we've got on trial, we need to make the right choices. So, for example, we will retrofit blind spot mirrors to all the vehicles as part of the first round of the bus safety standard. We have got 800 vehicles with ISA on them now, and all new vehicles will have that because the technology will be ready. Mobileye is something that's worked for Tony, so we'll be really pleased to see that rolled out across. But in terms of retrofitting, we need to make sure that we have a proper programme for an affordability point of view. Because if you take each thing in isolation and say that's quite cheap, we'll stick that on, there'll be something else that will come along which might be good, and then we say, right, that's cheap and we'll stick that on. We need a proper programme, and we're not ready yet to say that's the right system to retrofit. But, you know, I mean, I work closely with Tony and obviously will update you on how the rollout goes, but we need to look at it across the round.
Just on that quickly, Claire, has there been any detailed analysis in terms of the cost if you were to go down that route?
In terms of which route?
In terms of Tony's rolling it out across the Mobileye.
We haven't investigated retrofitting Mobileye, no, not at this stage.
So, yeah, can I ask, Tony, financially, is it worthwhile saving 25% of the injuries?
I think our problem is we've built our business case on an assumed reduction in third-party claims costs, so the costs from the people we injure. It is entirely possible that you could save a load of incidents where there was nobody injured. One of the realities is that we get far more people injured on the bus in non-collision scenarios. It's a bit of a punt to look at it in a strict financial sense, I think. We've convinced ourselves it will pay back. Otherwise we wouldn't have done it. But there's a moral argument, clearly. We don't want to go and injure and kill them.
You believe on balance?
On balance, we think it's a good thing, and that's why we've gone ahead with it.
Right.
Whether we can replicate the same results across the whole fleet is open to debate at the minute, because we don't know. We haven't got the volume to work with.
So there you go, Claire. It's almost zero cost, effectively. I mean, I'm sure you could, for a very small amount of money, you could
as Tony mentioned,
save 25% of the injuries.
Okay, well, let's see how the rollout goes. As Tony mentioned, I mean, we need to build strong business cases for requiring different systems on the vehicles, and we need a broader set of data to be able to do that.
Right, if I can come to Tom now. Tom, how has the bus safety programme and bus safety standard been received, and what else should be included within them, I think?
Like I said, I think from one perspective, transparency. TfL probably is the most transparent bus safety, at least in terms of data publishing, probably in the world. And that is 100% due to the London Assembly and myself getting on their case and making them do the work. So it's good. There's a lot more that needs to be done. And I would argue on transparency, I think obviously the safety performance index being published would be very important. I also think the route risk assessments or audits would be great to be published as well. I think people should know what TfL deems to be risks on routes, and I think that should be published on the route data information. I think the issue I have with TfL is that there's a lot of information that's out there that it's not getting. I think Sinisa pointed to the bus drivers are one of the key constituents here in terms of they suffer. They have pretty substantial issues with collision injuries. I mean, I have some data that showed 370 collisions last year injuring bus drivers, of which 38 were hospitalized with serious injuries. So this affects bus drivers too. And I think bus drivers are a huge source of information, huge source of knowledge, and huge source of experience that is not being consulted on a level, I think, at a level and detail enough. I mean, there are 20 bus routes in London that don't have 24/7 toilets for bus drivers. Now, in terms of safety, if you're getting behind the wheel of a bus that doesn't have a guaranteed toilet, that already says it.
Yeah, we're coming on to that.
That's fine, but I'm just thinking, we talk about technology, we talk about all the great things, and I think some of the basic things, as has been pointed out, need to be focused on.
So can I ask you then, Tom, what do you feel are the top 3 things that would improve bus safety?
I think transparency. I think you need to have, for example, we know every quarter, or at least every quarter, there's the bus safety, there's a bus operators forum, and I think that should be participated in, at least on an observation basis. If you're talking about safety at any point, that a member of the London Assembly or a private individual, whatever independent person should attend this. I think it's very important that safety is scrutinized on a regular basis. Secondly, accountability. I think this is something that Caroline and you have been pushing on, is TfL does not have a bus operator's license. That is owned by the 10 bus operators. So in some respects, TfL has no responsibility for the behavior of any private for-profit bus that's operated on London Road. I want, the mayor has already identified the MDs of those companies as being ultimately accountable for safety. I want those MDs' contact details or the chief safety officer of each company listed on the TfL website. So when you're in a bicycle or in a car or anything, when you have an incident, you contact a person at that company, not at TfL. If Mike Brown says they're not getting the data or they'll be cut out of the loop, then find some way to cut TfL in the loop.
What's the reason for contacting them directly, though?
Let me give you a good example. A friend of mine nearly killed by a go-ahead bus, and he sent in a claim or whatever to the TfL website where you put in the data, and he also then, I gave him the contact details, and Mann was copied in this conversation as well. And he got an immediate response from the bus company when he sent it to the directo. I don't think he's gotten any response from TfL yet, from the website. Bus CCTV data. Sean Berry, your colleague, asked. It disappears between 4 and 10 days. It's owned by the bus companies as well. If there's a 4-day, I mean, I experienced it myself. There was no CCTV evidence from any bus of my bus collision where I nearly died because it was over Christmas time and no one bothered to ask. So I managed to get it later when I bugged the companies and things like that, but that was after I filed an IPCC claim and stuff. But anyway, the bottom line is an individual who is seriously injured should not have to chase down people through FOIs and everything to try to get information about their near death. And that's the issue. The bus company MDs have to be held responsible and have to be contactable. If not them, then the chief safety officer. The last issue is corporate governance. I really think that a stakeholder of some sort needs to be on every single bus operator board for London. They can be observational. They don't have to be at all the meetings, or they don't have to be at all the incidents we're talking about market-related stuff. But I think they need to sit on any meeting where safety is discussed. And I think boards would be strengthened and companies would be strengthened by having individuals who were not related to the bus company or TfL sat on these company boards. And I really think that would be a cure.
They would be like ex officio, though. They wouldn't necessarily have voting rights.
You would apply for these jobs. I mean, you couldn't just be off the street. You'd have real credentials. Yeah. And I think there are a lot of people in London who'd be willing to serve in those roles.
Okay, so in our report, we've got a graph that shows that bus collisions and customer injuries are going down per million miles. Have you any views on that sort of thing?
I do. I've saw that recently. Since September 2018, TfL has been using million miles, so they use a very large denominator. Now, prior to that point, for 4 years, or at least 2 years, TfL published completely different stats that show bus injuries increasing and collisions from bus injuries increasing. When you divide something by a million miles, it automatically, and especially over time, you're going to reduce things. Boeing 737 MAX plane got safer after it crashed in Indonesia on the basis of that logic. The more a thing travels, you can divide it and the incidents go down. And I think this is a tricky and not very honest way of dividing it by a million miles is not an even or fair way to do it. Do it the way that was done up until June of 2018. Show the actual numbers. That's the important thing. What
did the actual numbers show?
Increase every year since 2014. Collisions of falls on buses was slightly higher. London buses, customer injuries total were higher, and London bus collisions going up. But when you divide it by a million miles, it's like magic, it just goes down.
We're not getting very near to Vision Zero, are we?
Well, you do, but you do it by changing the denominator.
Can I just wrap up please? We've got two more sections.
I think I can finish on that actually.
Great, thank you. Just moving on to some of the issues you both Sinisa and Tony mentioned in bus drivers who are really crucial in all of this. We're just going to look at how we really engage them. So moving to Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, looking specifically at supporting bus drivers, and in our report, Driven to Distraction, under recommendation 5, there were a lot of things around the kind of working environment that operators can do to reduce the number of things that actually distract drivers and make it harder for them to deliver a safe service. So these were things like maintenance, everyday maintenance issues, things like mirrors being knocked off or, kind of badly positioned, provision of toilets. We asked for a review of radio contact procedures and also a review of best practice for bus infrastructure and design, which also was about sort of how the street was designed, the sort of bus lanes and everything else, and where the parking bays were in relation to bus routes, so that that was an attempt to kind of listen to some of the stuff that drivers told us when they came into our committee. So as a first question, and this is for everyone, but perhaps Sinisa could start, is how has TfL consulted with bus drivers on the changes being made to improve bus safety?
Well, my knowledge, other than tripartite meetings that we're holding with TfL, I don't see much of consultation there. But even there, the problem that we're seeing from Unite point of view is that it's a tick box exercise. You'll put some ideas forward. We don't feel those ideas actually taken on board.
And is that taken on board by the bus companies or by TfL or by both?
By both. By both, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Are there some? Is there an example of?
Well, example we could. For example, we were talking about standardizing bus checks, which are very important in the morning. You've got all these different companies. Some are giving 7 minutes, the others giving 10, some 15 minutes. This should be driven by TfL. TfL should be contractually asking the companies to have the same safe amount of time to check a bus before we take the bus out.
Can I just say, well, yes, that could happen. Clearly, TfL could mandate our whole operating lives, if you like. I mean, you could go to any sort of extreme. But each operator will have its own operator's licences, and those maintenance arrangements are lodged with the Traffic Commissioner and accepted as fundamental to maintaining that operator's licence. And I think certainly what we've experienced, and I don't think it's any different anywhere else, is that we're now far more attuned to the condition of the bus when it goes out in the morning. We're far more attuned to the driver's responsibilities. Now, the Traffic Commissioner will see the driver as the most important part of the maintenance system. So the first use check that's done by a driver in the morning is the thing that's done every day. Engineers only see the bus every 4 or 6 weeks. So the driver is the key to that. I think we're now far clearer of what those responsibilities are and what the driver needs to do. The drivers are clearer about their responsibility for that, but that sits with the operators under the operator's licensing framework, and I think always should do. If anybody wants to look at our YouTube video, we've got a YouTube video out there that's had tens of thousands of hits on our first use check process, and I'm not saying it's everybody has to do it the same way. It's a good example, but those sorts of things are out there and people can follow.
All the companies, all the operators running things in the way that you run those checks?
They don't necessarily run them in the same way as us, but they all have their same responsibilities under the operator's licence. And that's the framework we operate in. If somebody wants to change the framework, that's fine, but that's the way it sits today.
So, could I let Sinisa just come back and then Claire?
But that's just the issue. We should be using best practice rather than giving people option to do whatever it's cost effective for them. Mm-hmm. And I must say, I actually feel that the companies, while I'm sad that being listened to, the companies are more forthcoming and listening in regards to that, to unite the union rather than TfL.
Could I have Claire come in there as well? Thank
So,
you. Thank you, Sinisa.
So just on the engagement with drivers, I mean, clearly it's very difficult for TfL to engage with each individual operating company's union representative. So hence the tripartite was set up. So we have representatives from Unite who are there to talk on behalf of drivers across London. We have 2 or 3 bus operator representatives that attend the meeting, and then myself and a couple of colleagues from TfL. The idea of that meeting is to ensure that anything that affects all drivers is brought there by Unite to say, we're really concerned about this, what are we going to do about it? So I need the operators obviously to give their views on the issue raised. Where an issue is raised and it's a specific operator, I ask Unite for specifics so I can go and challenge them if it's not adequate. But when it comes to introducing the bus safety programme, a new activity like the bus safety standard, the fatigue research, TfL has sat down separately with Unite representatives from tripartite, because that's the appropriate way to do it, to take them through the programme, the bus safety standard, taking the Unite representatives through what was in the standard, inviting them to the launch, taking them through the fatigue research, inviting views on the questions that we were going to ask. The driver training, Unite were involved in exactly what we put into the driver training in terms of what things they were concerned about from members. We involved Unite in the security training briefing. We put that together and delivered it over the last year, which is something Unite brought to our attention, and we agreed it was not good enough. So we really took on board the suggestions from Unite and put that into our training course. Beyond that, the relationship needs to be between the bus operating company and their employees. So anything we're mandating, which is a new thing that applies to all operators, is right that we speak to Unite at tripartite and explain what it is we're trying to achieve. Taking individual safety initiatives forward needs to be done by the individual operating companies because it's their remit to do so. But some of the things I think Sinisa mentioned around best practice, he's absolutely right. We need to take the best and say, why don't you try it this way? And one of the things that we did is one of the operators had a good process for managing people that have been spat at. So spit kits was something that were either given as individual issue or put on a bus, and it was a bit haphazard. So because the operators that did that well put it on the vehicle, we mandated that that happened across the fleet. So where we see something that everyone should be doing because it's going to be better for the driver, we will mandate that. But there, as Tony says, there are areas where the operator within their licence needs to make those choices. But if through any research or repeat issues that we find there's a problem with a particular operator, that's my responsibility to pick up with them, and I will. So I just wanted to kind of give you a bit more around the things we do engage on, but what I expect the operators to do as well.
Thank you. And I should say equally now that we get measured in many, many different ways by TfL. We talked earlier on about data. I mean, we get measured on everything. I think they know my inside leg measurement, actually. But one of the things that has happened recently, there's been a long-standing engineering quality monitoring mechanism where TfL get a third party in to check a good proportion of our buses every year. And that's just been amended very recently to ramp up attention on the sort of defects that really irritate drivers, actually. So I think inevitably the scores will slightly rise over the next few months, and then hopefully we'll all start addressing them more readily. But that's directly directed at things that aren't quite as obvious. They're not safety critical, but they will irritate drivers and annoy drivers.
But actually, you say they may not be safety critical, but actually, if you've got a connection of several,
in the broadest sense,
of several minor issues, actually, and that's what's so important about those checks before the bus goes out.
Absolutely.
Because one thing not working properly might actually be the distracting thing that causes someone to be involved in a collision.
It's been a long-standing discussion point about rattling windows. Now, what impact does a rattling window have on a driver? Well, they get very irritated over time.
Can I just move us on a bit to look at the... we've heard about the Destination Zero safety training, and I just wonder what feedback there's been from drivers on the Destination Zero training.
We from Unite, we believe that this has been tailored mostly for novice bus driver. Someone who is doing the test rather than people who have been driving for many, many years. So we don't feel we have been actually consulted on that as much as we could.
What do you think? How do you think it could be improved?
Well, it could be improved by actually taking the views that my colleague John Murphy has actually given to TfL tripartite meetings, which we don't feel has been included in.
Claire, do you want to?
So, I think the first thing to say is it only started last week, so I haven't got any driver feedback yet. Obviously, that's Unite the Union's feedback from having attended the pre-briefing sessions and putting the virtual reality goggles on, etc. So, I think in terms of some of the feedback that came from John there is he didn't want the training to make the driver feel like it was their responsibility, the safety of London's roads, and I think that's absolutely critical. The idea of the training is to show that everyone has a part to play, but because it's for drivers, it's obviously focusing on the driver's part to play in that. And I think we need to make sure that in terms of the delivery of the training, which will be done by the bus operating companies, and we will audit and manage that. So in terms of the team that put the training package together, they will go out and sit in and observe how the training is delivered. We need to make sure the messaging is key, because I think that's the point. It needs to be landed right so people understand.
It's not about blame, it's about making sure that everything is as safe as possible. It's just about raising awareness,
and drivers know that there are issues with cyclists, etc. But I think sometimes just really putting yourself in that zone, it's very powerful if you. We're absolutely happy for you to come and have a look at the training. If you put the headset on and feel what it's like to be a bus driver and you don't know what's going to come around the corner next, and also if you're a cyclist and a bus comes close to it, all those issues being dealt with, and I think it's powerful. I don't drive a bus, obviously. I can't put myself in that position.
We are always in favour on any training.
Yeah.
That's always Unite stance. We want our drivers to be trained. We want repeated trainings for those people who have been driving for many years, even those who don't have any incidents, because that will just make sure prevent future incidents. But it's absolutely true that drivers feel they're blamed for everything, because there is no mechanism of a driver going back and saying, we've got a problem with this, can anyone help us with this issue or that issue? There's nothing there other than when something happens, putting down a occurrence report and then waiting to see what the company's response is going to be.
Sorry, are you saying if drivers are reporting issues that it doesn't feel like those are being picked up?
Yeah.
So how are these measured? Is there a kind of measure of issues that get reported and how they're dealt with? Is that data, is that reported back to TfL? How would, if we're talking about trying to make the bus system safer, if we're hearing here that bus drivers are saying they're feeling that some stuff is being reported that isn't being acted on, how does that filter through both to the operators and to TfL?
So, in terms of the assurance programme that I mentioned earlier, that is carried out...
Sorry, could I... Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, could I just say, Keith, it's very distracting when you were speaking and it seems to get picked up on the speakers.
I mentioned the assurance programme that our health and safety team conduct, and within that programme they are, as I said, talking to drivers, talking to garage managers, talking to guys booking drivers on about some of the issues that are happening. So we don't have a systematic report that comes in saying these things were raised and not dealt with, because obviously we wouldn't know unless we were told, but we, through the assurance programme, ask questions of how are safety related issues reported, and if we have any concerns about that, it's dealt with immediately between the safety manager and the garage manager in that assurance audit, or not audit, assurance visit. But what I will reiterate really is that because our relationship with the drivers is through tripartite, because it's through the union, we don't employ the drivers. If there's any systematic issues that aren't getting dealt with by operators, we need to be advised so we can pick that up with the individual operator. But what we do know is that the Hello London customer experience training that was rolled out over the last 2 years, every time there was a session, there was a sort of board where drivers could write down what their real issues were in terms of the whole role of being a driver. Every single one of those was fed back to the operators concerned through steps, who were the people running the course, and we wanted to see what progress had been made on those. So we have shifted emphasis to say that we will get feedback and we will put it back to the operator. So I think we need to keep that loop going, but it really is up to the operators to ensure those processes are in place, and that's what our assurance system does.
Okay, but you are checking, if you're hearing stuff from
you are
checking
absolutely.
Back with
yes.
the operators?
Yes, that's our job to do that, because we can't ignore it, obviously we wouldn't.
Okay, and that is reported in TfL board papers, or...?
Well, it would come through the tripartite meeting. So if there's a specific issue with a safety... So if there's a road danger issue or a junction or an issue with a layout that we are concerned about, we have a process where the operator can feed that into our control centre and we can deal with that. If we get told through Unite that these things are getting fed in but nothing's happening, we'll deal with them. But I haven't had that yet, so that's not come to me. So if that is an issue, we need to pick it up. But that's between, obviously, the union need to raise those specifics.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll hear if things get raised and not dealt with.
Thank you.
The toilet provision was one of the really serious issues that we heard about in the round table. Absolutely shocking that there were routes that had no toilets. And, you know, particularly we heard from bus drivers who menstruate who said how difficult it was when they were on their period. We gather that every route was due to have a toilet by 2017 and that they would be open all hours by 2018. Is that now the case?
The programme for the 42 bus routes that didn't have a toilet 24/7 is due for completion in July 2019, which is earlier than the original date, which was May 20. So we've brought that date forward. So where we are at the moment is we have got half of those facilities in 26, and we've got the remainder to do in the next couple of months. Now, the reason, I mean, it's absolutely despicable that a driver can't use a toilet. And, you know, I have to say, I didn't, until I came to buses, realise that this was a situation. But having found that it's a situation, we are doing what we can to address it. The Mayor has helped us with this in terms of the funding, but that's not where the challenge is. The challenge is locating the toilet on the right location and getting borough support for that, obviously local community support for it, and making sure the utilities are available. So there are about 4 to 6 locations where we're really struggling to get the toilet where we need it to go. So we're having to look at alternatives, which might not be exactly where we want.
So that's, sorry, people are refusing toilets to go in particular areas?
Yes, local community, because they don't want a toilet near the house.
It was on the news. It was on the news. Was this what you wanted to come in on? Because I think it was specific to your constituency.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was in Biggin Hill was one of the ones where TfL got a bit of a mauling. All I was going to ask you is what you are doing differently as a result of the experience you had there.
So I think in Biggin Hill, the engagement with the borough, I think, was accepted, was done, but the local... Okay.
And it wasn't accepted by the borough.
Right. So the local community weren't given any notice, which was an error, and the approach to working with the borough to deliver it has changed as a result of what happened at Biggin Hill. I think the issue we've got is that we want to make the bus network as accessible as possible, and bus routes don't start and end in bus garages, and if they did, life would be simple, but they don't. And we really are trying our hardest to work with authorities. You know, we're working with the fire brigade about putting something outside a fire station in Lambeth, and we're doing what we can to get everyone on board with the issue, because I think everyone accepts this as a basic human need, but it is very challenging. So we've definitely learnt lessons from Biggin Hill, but we will have further challenges to come. So what we need to do is find alternative options. So, you know, where we can share facilities between operators, we're doing that. But in many of these locations, it's very difficult. So we have a plan. We're on track to deliver the majority by the end of July. There will be a couple of difficult ones, but we're looking for alternative locations for those.
Just on that, Claire, I think, again, because I remember seeing that news clip, and I think the main thing, going back to some of Member Bacon's point, the residents weren't informed. So to sort of open your window and you then see this.
And it wasn't attractive.
It wasn't, you know, it looked like a Dalek box.
It was actually worse than that, Chair, because not only were they not informed, TfL claimed that they were. And the local ward councillors went and knocked on every single door, and not one of them had anything. It was a real PR disaster from Transport for London, because they were treated in a very offhand way. The only good thing that came out of it was that TfL moved relatively speedy to get rid of it. So a month after it was installed, it was gone, and the grass verge was reinstalled. And unfortunately, what it did do is sabotage what was meant to be a decent project for people that really need it, i.e. bus drivers. And, you know, the things aren't designed particularly synthetically to be put in a residential area anyway. I mean, it was nicknamed the TARDIS locally, because it has a strong resemblance to the TARDIS, and obviously things are going on there. One question I was going to ask about that is, Julia Lopez, the Member of Parliament for Hornchurch and Upminster, wrote to Transport for London and did ask why these things couldn't be doubling up as a disabled loo, and I gather there's a key card or something to get into them.
Right.
Certainly, I know there's a security lock on because I went to look at one in Big Hill. That was refused. Is there any particular reason why?
I'm afraid I don't know, because it's not the project director delivering these will have responded to that, so I don't know. I didn't know that.
Come back to us on that then.
Sorry?
Are you able to come back to us
Yes,
on
absolutely,
that?
absolutely.
And could you also, I mean, because obviously there are assembly members for all areas around London, so if there are particular areas where you're having trouble, I'm sure assembly members would be helpful in trying to
that would be very welcome,
get the local community on board, because it is absolutely fundamental that bus drivers have access to toilets.
Just moving on to...
I'll just quickly add one more thing. The problem that we're also facing is that there are toilets around that we could use. Most tube stations have toilets that a bus driver could use, but we are refused entry. And that's perhaps something that TfL could actually
refuse entry in tube stations.
Tube stations, yeah. We have bus stands outside tube stations, and when you try to access toilets there, they'll refuse you. The management of those tube stations will refuse you.
Seems to me, Chair, that's a rather easy fix, isn't it?
So I can respond to that, because that is not the agreement between buses and London Underground. They are to open up their facilities. I think the issue we have, and it comes up regularly, and every time it comes up, I put one of my managers onto scene to sort it out, is locally how people treat each other at that location on the day that someone goes to access the toilet is where it's falling down. We've got to sort that out, because management have agreed. Of course it makes absolute sense. Why wouldn't we use our facilities for bus drivers? So we need to make sure that every time we have a new issue, we resolve it. So that is something that we're currently doing. But yeah, thank you.
So management have agreed, and has that been communicated to all layers of staff?
So the director of stations in London Underground has said, yes, of course you can use these facilities. So where we can, we do. Where we have problems, we deal with that with the local management to get that unblocked. The main point of
no pun intended.
Yeah, no pun intended, is about capacity actually. So not wishing to go back to that pun, but it is about some locations are heavily used, and we need to make sure we've got the right facilities for all of the drivers. So, if it means we need to put in more facilities for bus drivers, we should do that.
We should do. Okay, great. Just moving on to our last section of apologies. We have overrun quite a lot. So it's just coming back to the incident report and investigation, and someone Pigeon has one.
Yeah, so if I just, you've already set out, Claire, how you've improved incident reporting, and perhaps we might get more detail of that in writing, because we're short of time. But the one area we haven't touched on this morning, which I'm very conscious of, is what support victims are getting who are injured in incidents involving buses and their families. We've also got the Sarah Hope line, and see Sarah over there listening in. I'm wondering whether you could just give a high level what additional support you're putting in there. Maybe we can get more detail in writing as well afterwards.
I wonder if I might take that with
sure,
with permission. This is an area which we are very very aware of. We convened a session earlier this year with victims of road collisions, particularly via some of the third sector organisations like Break and Road Peace, to bring those people together, and we brought them together with the mayor, the deputy mayor, with the commissioner Mike Brown, with Gareth Powell. So and those people spent a significant amount of time with those people, really hearing their stories, understanding where things are falling down. Out of that, we've convened some work internally to look at how we, Transport for London, can help drive improvement across the piece, and we've continued to liaise with those organisations, with Sarah and so on, in helping shape that. We recognise that the sort of in the first instance of a collision taking place, we, Transport for London, are not the first responder. The police and the ambulance service are the first responder. That person will then be treated. They will make their way through the NHS. We may change junction layouts and so on. And the picture that's emerged is that there is a multiplicity of agencies involved at different points, and that some of those people are falling between the cracks in terms of the treatment they receive. Some of those people are not receiving information about the incident that they were involved in. there's a broader wrapper around that the victim of a road collision is not treated in the same way as the victim of a violent crime. Is not accorded the same rights and support. So what we've recognised is that victims are not getting the support they require. They're not even necessarily getting the support that's available, and that although this is a multi-agency piece and Transport for London only has an element of this, we're now looking at how we can use our good offices and our influence with other agencies to help improve that experience of the victim. And so we've identified a number of areas where we want to make improvements, and we've now convened a small project group to start to move forward on those.
So is there like an action plan of things you're taking forward that we could see?
There isn't an action plan yet. We've been through we've been through a rapid development process that's taken about 4 weeks to develop a number of areas in which we know we need to develop better.
So could
actions.
we see that sort of list of the areas you're working on? Could you set that out in a letter to us?
Yes.
So we could just to get a feel, because it's such an important area. And it sounds like you're doing some great work there. It'd be good for us to get more of a feel for some of the detail.
Yes, we'd be happy to write to you.
Wonderful. And also whether you could pick up in that the issue of whether there's been any progress on extending the brief of the Victims Commissioner for London to include victims of road crime and road collision.
We'll include that.
Lovely. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you all very much. Apologies that we have gone over time. And just to thank our guests again, Claire, Mann, Stuart, Reid, Sinisa, Cica, Tony Wilson and Tom Kearney for your discussions and contributions this afternoon now. Members, can we note the report and the discussions?
Noted.
Can we agree to delegate authority from me in conjunction with the group leads, the final output for our tram and bus safety in London?
Agreed.
And can we agree the work programme for 2019-20? And the date of the next meeting is scheduled. Apologies. Can we also delegate through me in consultation with the group leads to agree to scope the terms of reference for the next investigation on London's transport now and in the future? Agreed. And date of our next meeting is Wednesday the 10th of July, 10 a.m. We're back in the chamber, so hopefully no more additional mix-ups, and don't have any other urgent business, so meeting is closed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
GLA, Committee Room 5, Sound.